Tonight, we stand at a threshold humanity has never crossed before. The boundary between mind and machine grows thinner with each passing year. Brain-computer interfaces, once crude and experimental, now read neural signals with startling precision. Researchers decode thoughts from brain scans. Paralyzed patients control robotic arms with intention alone. The technology advances faster than our philosophy can keep pace with. And beneath all this progress lies a question we've barely begun to ask. When human consciousness merges with artificial intelligence, will the hybrid mind still need to sleep? This isn't science fiction anymore. It's a question of decades, perhaps less. Companies are already implanting electrode arrays into human brains. Artificial intelligence systems process information at speeds that make human cognition look glacial by comparison. The merger isn't a matter of if, but when. And as we approach this singularity, this point of no return where human and machine consciousness intertwine irreversibly, we must confront what happens to one of the most fundamental aspects of being human, the nightly descent into sleep and the dreams that accompany it. Sleep has defined the human experience since before we were human. Every ancestor you have, stretching back millions of years through evolutionary time, closed their eyes and surrendered consciousness to the dark. They dreamed fever dreams in caves, prophetic visions in ancient temples, anxious nightmares in medieval villages, and surreal cinema in modern bedrooms. Sleep-shaped cultures, inspired art, and occupied roughly a third of every life ever lived. But what happens to this ancient biological imperative when consciousness no longer resides purely in biological tissue? What if your dreams are not simply the random firing of neurons during sleep, but something far more fundamental? What if each night, as you drift into unconsciousness, you enter a quantum state where multiple realities exist simultaneously, where the rules that govern particles smaller than atoms also govern the landscapes of your sleeping mind? What if the moment you wake is not just a return to consciousness, but an act of measurement, a collapse of infinite possibilities into a single observed reality? Tonight we explore a deeply speculative idea, one that sits at the boundary of established science and philosophical wonder. We will ask whether dreams might be quantum phenomena, whether the strange rules that govern subatomic particles might also shape the theatre of your sleeping consciousness. This is not mainstream science. It is a thought experiment, a journey into what could be, drawn from cutting-edge theories that blur the line between physics and metaphysics. The question cuts deeper than mere curiosity. Sleep isn't optional decoration on consciousness. It's woven into the very fabric of how human minds work. During sleep, the brain consolidates memories, pruning weak connections and strengthening important ones. It processes emotions, integrating the day's experiences into the narrative of self. It clears metabolic waste that accumulates during waking hours, washing the brain in cerebrospinal fluid that flows more freely when consciousness dims. Without sleep, human minds deteriorate rapidly. Cognition crumbles. Emotions become unstable. Hallucinations emerge. Death follows within weeks. But artificial intelligence doesn't sleep. Neural networks can run continuously, processing data without pause, without fatigue, without the metabolic constraints that force biological brains into daily shutdown. When these two types of consciousness merge, when human neural tissue interfaces seamlessly with silicon processors, which paradigm wins? Does the hybrid consciousness inherit humanity's need for rest? Or does it transcend this biological limitation entirely? And if it does transcend sleep, what becomes of dreams? Those strange nightly narratives that have puzzled philosophers and scientists for millennia. These aren't merely technical questions. They strike at the heart of what consciousness is. If a mind doesn't need to sleep, has it stopped being human in some fundamental way? If dreams disappear, what essential aspect of the human experience vanishes with them? And conversely, if an artificial intelligence begins to dream, what does that tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? The answers matter because they will define the future of our species. As we stand on the edge of this transformation, this is the exploration of the last dream before the singularity, the final night of purely human sleep, and the strange new consciousness that might emerge when the sun rises on a merged mind. If you enjoy these quiet explorations into the unknown, I invite you to like and subscribe, or to share a simple thought down in the comments. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest, settle in, and allow your mind to open to possibilities that stretch beyond the ordinary. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift like particles in superposition. And let us begin this journey together into the quantum heart of dreams. The world you experience when you're awake feels solid and real. Objects have definite positions. Events unfold in clear sequences of cause and effect. When you observe something, it exists in a particular state. A chair is either here or there, not both. The moon rises whether you watch it or not. This is the classical world, the realm of everyday experience governed by Newton's laws of motion and Einstein's relativity. But beneath this apparent solidity lies a stranger realm, at the smallest, scales of existence. In the world of atoms and electrons, photons and quarks, reality behaves in ways that defy common sense. A particle can be in two places at once. An electron can spin both up and down simultaneously. A photon can behave as both a wave and a particle, depending on how you choose to observe it. This is the quantum world, and it is not a metaphor or an approximation. It is the fundamental nature of reality itself. Brain-computer interfaces have evolved rapidly from laboratory curiosities to functional medical devices. The current generation reads neural signals through electrode arrays implanted directly into the cortex. These devices detect the firing patterns of individual neurons, translating intention into action. A quadriplegic patient imagines moving their arm, and robotic limbs respond. Someone with locked-in syndrome spells out words letter by letter using only thought. The bandwidth is still limited, the resolution imperfect, but the fundamental principle is proven. Silicon can read biological neural code. What these interfaces reveal is that the brain's language is electrical. Neurons communicate through action potentials, brief voltage spikes that propagate along axons. When many neurons fire in coordinated patterns, they create detectable field potentials that electrodes can measure. Different mental states produce different patterns. Focusing attention generates one signature, recalling a memory produces another. And sleep, far from being a uniform shutdown, creates a rich tapestry of distinct electrical rhythms. Sleep architecture refers to the structured progression of stages that the brain cycles through each night. In the lightest stage, called N1, the waking alpha rhythm of the electroencephalogram begins to fragment. Muscle tone decreases. Consciousness starts to slip away, though sleepers often deny they were asleep if awakened here. This threshold state lasts only minutes before deepening into N2 sleep, characterized by brief bursts of rapid neural oscillations called sleep spindles and large slow waves called K-complexes. The brain is clearly asleep now, though still somewhat responsive to external stimuli. For over a century, physicists have grappled with the strangeness of quantum mechanics, with its probabilities and paradoxes, its spooky actions at a distance, and its stubborn refusal to make sense in classical terms. And at the heart of this mystery lies a question that has never been fully answered. What role does consciousness play in the quantum world? Does observation itself shape reality? And if so, what does that tell us about the nature of mind? When we turn our attention to dreams, we find a landscape that seems to mirror the quantum realm in uncanny ways. In dreams, you can be in multiple places simultaneously. Time flows backward and forward without reason. Impossible things happen, as if they were natural laws. People morph into others. Buildings shift and change. The rules of physics bend and break. And then, when you wake, this multiplicity collapses into a single linear memory, a narrative you construct from fragments and impossibilities. Could this similarity be more than coincidence? Could dreams actually be quantum phenomena, governed by the same strange laws that rule the subatomic world? Could the act of waking be a kind of measurement, a collapse of the quantum wave function of consciousness itself? Tonight, we explore these questions with care and wonder, walking the line between science and speculation, between what we know and what we dare to imagine. As sleep deepens further into N3, sometimes called slow-wave sleep or deep sleep, large amplitude delta waves dominate the EEG. Billions of neurons fire in synchrony, creating a slow rolling rhythm that washes across the cortex. This is restorative sleep, where growth hormone releases, where the glymphatic system most actively clears metabolic waste, where the deepest rest occurs. Arousing someone from this stage is difficult. They wake confused, disoriented, unaware of where they are for several seconds. Then the cycle reverses, but instead of returning to wakefulness, the brain enters a qualitatively different state. Rapid eye movement sleep, or REM. The EEG pattern resembles waking consciousness, fast and desynchronized. The eyes dart rapidly beneath closed lids, giving the stage its name. Most voluntary muscles become paralyzed, preventing the body from acting out dreams. Heart rate and breathing become irregular, and the mind generates the vivid, bizarre, emotionally intense narratives we call dreams. This entire cycle, from light sleep through deep sleep and into REM, repeats approximately every 90 minutes throughout the night. Current brain-computer interfaces can detect these sleep stages with remarkable accuracy. The electrical signatures are distinct enough that algorithms can classify them in real time. This capability has research implications, allowing scientists to trigger stimuli during specific stages or record neural activity patterns associated with different types of sleep. But it also raises a more profound question. If an interface can read sleep states, can it also generate them? Are the quantum foundations, understanding the impossible. To understand how dreams might be quantum phenomena, we must first understand what quantum mechanics actually says about reality. And here, at the foundation, we encounter ideas so strange that even the physicists who work with them daily admit they don't fully grasp what they mean. The quantum world is built on a principle called superposition. In classical physics, a coin is either heads or tails. Before you flip it, you simply don't know which it will be, but it will definitely land one way or the other. In quantum mechanics, a particle can exist in a state that is genuinely both at once, not just unknown, but actually both, until the moment it is measured. An electron can orbit an atom in multiple energy levels simultaneously. A photon can pass through two slits at the same time. This is not about incomplete knowledge. This is the actual state of reality at the quantum scale. The mathematics that describes these superposition states is called the wave function. Imagine ripples spreading across a pond, waves of probability that describe where a particle might be found and what properties it might have when observed. The wave function doesn't tell you where the particle is. It tells you the probability of finding it in any particular place if you choose to look. And here is where things become truly strange. Before measurement, the particle is not secretly in one place or the other. It genuinely exists as this spreading wave of possibility, present in all potential locations at once, weighted by probability. Some research suggests this might be possible. Transcranial electrical stimulation, which delivers mild currents through the scalp, can entrain neural oscillations. Apply stimulation at the frequency of slow-wave sleep, and you can deepen natural deep sleep, making it more restorative. The effect is modest with current technology, limited by the skull's resistance to electrical current and the imprecision of external stimulation. But an implanted interface bypasses these limitations. It could, in theory, induce sleep states by directly stimulating the neural circuits that generate them. This creates a strange possibility. A brain-computer interface could actively manage sleep. It might optimize the duration of deep sleep, ensuring maximum restoration. It could extend or shorten REM periods based on some calculated need for emotional processing or memory consolidation. It might even eliminate sleep entirely for short periods, maintaining arousal artificially when circumstances demand extended wakefulness, then compensating later with intensified sleep. But managing sleep from the outside is different from understanding what sleep does from the inside. The electrical rhythms that current interfaces detect are just the surface manifestation of vastly complex molecular and cellular processes. During sleep, gene expression changes. Protein synthesis accelerates. Synaptic connections strengthen or weaken based on patterns of activity during waking. Metabolic waste products accumulate in interstitial spaces during waking and flush away during sleep as brain cells physically shrink, opening channels for cerebrospinal fluid to flow through. The act of measurement changes everything. When you observe a quantum system, when you interact with it in a way that extracts information about its state, the wave function collapses. The spreading wave of possibility crystallizes into a single definite outcome. The particle that was everywhere is suddenly here. The electron that spun both up and down now spins only up. This is called wave function collapse, and it is one of the deepest mysteries in all of science. Why does measurement cause collapse? What counts as a measurement? Does it require a conscious observer, or does any interaction with the environment suffice? These questions have sparked decades of debate and multiple competing interpretations of quantum mechanics, none of them entirely satisfying, all of them strange in their own ways. The Copenhagen interpretation, developed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in the 1920s, suggests that the wave function is not a physical thing but a description of our knowledge. When we measure, we gain information, and the wave function updates to reflect this new knowledge. But this raises a profound question. If the wave function represents knowledge, whose knowledge? Does the universe exist in a definite state independent of observers? Or does consciousness play a fundamental role in actualizing reality? Some physicists, including Eugene Wigner, suggested that consciousness itself might be what collapses the wave function, that mind is woven into the very fabric of quantum reality. A brain-computer interface reading surface electrical activity captures none of this molecular complexity. It sees the EEG signature of slow-wave sleep, but not the growth hormone release, not the synaptic downscaling, not the waste clearance. As the technology advances toward more intimate merger between biological and artificial substrates, this gap between electrical signaling and deeper biological function becomes critical. Can silicon replicate not just the electrical patterns of sleep, but its restorative functions? Or will hybrid consciousness require periodic biological sleep for the organic components, even as the artificial components continue processing? The architecture of sleep evolved over hundreds of millions of years. It appears in organisms from insects to humans, suggesting fundamental importance. The specific patterns vary across species, but the basic principle remains. Neural tissue requires periodic offline time. Activity during waking creates imbalances. Sleep restores equilibrium. When we begin augmenting this tissue with artificial components, we enter uncharted territory. The silicon doesn't need restoration the same way neurons do. It doesn't accumulate metabolic waste. It doesn't require synaptic homeostasis. This creates a potential mismatch. The biological components of a hybrid system still need sleep. They still undergo the same molecular processes that require offline time, but the artificial components don't share this constraint. This could manifest as a strange form of partial consciousness. During sleep, the biological portions shut down, but the artificial portions remain active. The hybrid mind might experience a kind of divided awareness, where machine consciousness persists while human consciousness dreams. Others, like Hugh Everett, proposed the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that the wave function never actually collapses. Instead, every possible outcome of a quantum measurement actually occurs, each in its own branching universe. When you measure an electron spin, the universe splits into two branches, one where you observe spin up and another where you observe spin down, both equally real, both continuing forward in time, but forever separated from each other. This interpretation preserves the continuous evolution of the wave function, but at the cost of multiplying realities without limit. Then there are theories that try to modify quantum mechanics itself, adding hidden variables or spontaneous collapse mechanisms that don't require observers at all. The debate continues, unresolved, because quantum mechanics works perfectly in practice. It is the most precisely tested theory in all of science, predicting experimental results to staggering levels of accuracy. But what it means, what it tells us about the deep nature of reality, remains profoundly unclear. When we look at this quantum strangeness through the lens of consciousness and dreams, patterns begin to emerge. Could the sleeping mind exist in a superposition state, exploring multiple narrative threads simultaneously? Could the act of waking be the measurement that collapses these possibilities into a single remembered dream? Could consciousness itself be a quantum phenomenon, governed by the same laws that rule electrons and photons? Or perhaps the integration runs deeper. Maybe as biological and artificial components become more tightly coupled, they synchronize. The artificial portions learn to cycle on and off in rhythm with biological sleep stages, not because they need to, but because the human components do, and consciousness requires unity. The interface becomes so seamless that sleep becomes a property of the whole system, not just its biological parts. This leads to the deeper question: if consciousness can be sustained continuously without biological sleep, should it be? Just because technology makes something possible doesn't mean it's desirable. Sleep might serve functions we don't fully understand yet. Dreams might process information in ways that conscious thought cannot. The cycles of sleeping and waking might be essential to the subjective experience of being human, even if they're not strictly necessary for information processing. When we design hybrid consciousness, we're not just solving engineering problems, we're deciding what aspects of humanity to preserve and what to leave behind. The idea of uploading consciousness, of scanning a brain in sufficient detail to replicate it in software, raises even more radical questions about sleep and dreams. If biological tissue is removed from the equation entirely, if consciousness becomes pure pattern, running on non-biological substrates, does sleep become obsolete? And what happens to dreams when the dreamer has no brain? These are not questions with definitive answers, not yet. But they are questions worth asking, questions that point toward a possible unity between mind and matter, between the observer and the observed. As you lie here in the quiet darkness, your own consciousness preparing to slip into sleep, consider that you might be on the threshold of a quantum transition, about to enter a state where the rules change, where probability reigns, and where multiple versions of you might exist at once until morning brings the collapse. The Penrose-Hameroff theory. Quantum consciousness in microtubules. In the mid-1990s, two researchers from very different fields came together to propose one of the most ambitious and controversial theories about consciousness ever put forward. Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist who had worked with Stephen Hawking on black holes and the nature of space-time, joined forces with Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who had been studying the biological structures inside neurons. Together, they proposed a theory that placed quantum mechanics at the very heart of consciousness itself. Their theory, called orchestrated objective reduction, or OR for short, suggests that consciousness arises from quantum computations occurring inside tiny structures called microtubules that exist within every neuron in the brain. To understand this remarkable idea, we need to look inside the neuron, deep into its cellular architecture, to structures so small they exist at the boundary between the classical and quantum worlds. To approach this question, we need to understand why biological brains dream in the first place. There are several competing theories, and the truth likely involves multiple functions working in parallel. The oldest and most intuitive theory holds that dreams process emotions. During REM sleep, the brain replays emotionally charged memories, while the amygdala, the emotional center, remains highly active. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical analysis and executive control, shows reduced activity. This allows emotional content to be re-experienced without the rational constraints of waking thought. The processing that occurs during this replaying may help integrate emotional experiences into long-term memory in a way that reduces their immediate impact. Traumatic memories processed through dreams might lose some of their emotional charge. Positive experiences might be reinforced. The strange, illogical nature of dreams, where events morph and blend impossibly, might actually facilitate this processing by allowing associations that waking consciousness would reject as nonsensical. A complementary theory focuses on memory consolidation more broadly. During sleep, and especially during REM, the brain replays patterns of neural activity from waking experience. If you spent the day learning a new skill, practicing a musical instrument, or navigating a new environment, neurons that fired during that learning fire again during sleep, often in the same sequences. This replaying strengthens the synaptic connections involved, moving information from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent storage in the cortex. Neurons are the fundamental units of the nervous system, cells that transmit electrical and chemical signals throughout the brain and body. Inside each neuron, forming a kind of skeletal structure, are protein filaments called microtubules. These are hollow tubes about 25 nanometers in diameter, made of proteins called tubulins arranged in a geometric lattice. Microtubules serve many functions in the cell. They help maintain the cell's shape, they transport molecules from one part of the cell to another, and they play crucial roles during cell division. But Penrose and Hameroff propose something far more radical. They suggested that these microtubules might be quantum computers, performing calculations that exploit quantum superposition and entanglement. Each tubulin protein, they argued, could exist in a superposition of different conformational states, different shapes that the protein can fold into. And because the tubulins are arranged in ordered lattices and may be quantum mechanically entangled with their neighbours, the entire microtubule network could support coherent quantum states that span large regions of the brain. According to Orkoar, consciousness emerges when these quantum computations reach a critical threshold and undergo what Penrose calls objective reduction, a kind of quantum collapse that doesn't require an external observer but happens spontaneously when the quantum superposition becomes sufficiently large. This moment of collapse, they propose, is a moment of conscious experience, a quantum event that feels like something from the inside. Dreams, in this view, are the subjective experience of memory consolidation. The fragmented, recombined scenes we experience reflect the brain's attempt to weave new information into existing knowledge structures. The bizarreness comes from unusual associations being tested. The emotional intensity comes from the salience tagging that helps the brain decide what's important to remember. Dreams aren't random. They're computational processes with experiential side effects. A third theory suggests dreams serve a threat simulation function. Across cultures and throughout history, dreams frequently involve threatening scenarios, being chased, falling, fighting, fleeing. These anxiety-laden narratives might train the brain's threat response systems, allowing safe practice of adaptive behaviors. By repeatedly simulating danger during sleep, the mind might prepare better responses for waking threats. This could explain why nightmares, though distressing, persist across all human populations. They might be evolutionarily advantageous. There are other theories. That dreams maintain neural circuits by providing activation to areas that received little input during waking. That they facilitate creative insight by generating novel combinations of ideas. That they help form and maintain sense of self by constructing continuous narrative from fragmented experience. The diversity of theories suggests dreams serve multiple functions simultaneously, which is common in biological systems where evolution layers new purposes onto existing structures. The theory draws on Penrose's earlier work in physics, where he argued that quantum gravity, the elusive theory that would unite quantum mechanics and general relativity, might play a role in consciousness. Penrose suggested that the wave function collapse is not a probabilistic process as the standard Copenhagen interpretation claims, but an objective physical process governed by quantum gravitational effects. When a quantum superposition becomes large enough, when it involves sufficient mass or energy, space-time itself becomes unstable, and the superposition spontaneously reduces to a definite state. Hameroff brought the biological specificity to this abstract physical idea. He identified microtubules as the likely site of quantum processing in neurons, protected from environmental decoherence by the ordered structure of the tubulin lattice and by biological mechanisms that might shield quantum states from destructive interactions with the surrounding cellular environment. He also drew connections to anesthesia, noting that many anesthetic drugs bind to microtubules and disrupt their function, which could suggest that these structures are indeed involved in consciousness. The Orkoar theory is deeply speculative and remains controversial in both physics and neuroscience communities. Many physicists argue that quantum coherence cannot survive in the warm, wet, noisy environment of the brain. Quantum effects are typically observed only at extremely cold temperatures or in carefully isolated systems. The brain is neither cold nor isolated. It is bathed in thermal energy, with molecules constantly jostling and interacting, which should cause any quantum superposition to decohere almost instantly, collapsing into classical states long before reaching the threshold for conscious experience. Now consider an uploaded mind, a consciousness running entirely as software, with no biological substrate. Does it need any of these functions? The memory consolidation question seems most tractable. If an uploaded consciousness uses something like neural network architecture, it might benefit from replay-based learning similar to biological brains. Artificial neural networks in machine learning already use techniques analogous to memory consolidation. They train on batches of data, adjust connection weights, and periodically review previously learned information to avoid forgetting. An uploaded mind could implement this as a kind of artificial sleep, periods of reduced interaction with external inputs during which internal processing focuses on integrating recent experiences. This wouldn't require unconsciousness, though. The system could maintain awareness while simultaneously running consolidation processes in parallel. Unlike biological brains, which must temporarily shut down conscious processing to enable certain forms of memory consolidation, artificial systems could potentially do both at once. But would this parallel processing preserve the subjective experience of dreaming? Dreams aren't just memory consolidation viewed from the inside. They're narrative constructions, often wildly creative, sometimes emotionally profound, occasionally nightmarish. They have aesthetic and emotional qualities that seem to emerge from the constraints and peculiarities of how biological brains work. Remove those constraints and the experience might disappear even if the underlying function remains. Neuroscientists have also raised objections, pointing out that there is currently no experimental evidence that microtubules play any role in generating consciousness. The neural correlates of consciousness, the patterns of brain activity that correspond to conscious experience, seem to involve large-scale networks of neurons firing in coordinated patterns, not quantum effects in subcellular structures. The computational processes that the brain performs seem to be adequately explained by classical neural networks without needing to invoke quantum mechanics, and yet the theory has not been definitively ruled out. Recent experiments have revealed that quantum effects can persist in biological systems longer than previously thought. Photosynthesis, for example, appears to exploit quantum coherence to transport energy with remarkable efficiency. Birds may use quantum entanglement in molecules in their eyes to sense magnetic fields for navigation. Enzymes may tunnel through energy barriers using quantum effects. Life, it seems, may have evolved ways to harness and protect quantum phenomena even in warm, wet environments. If Penrose and Hameroff are correct, then consciousness is fundamentally quantum. And if consciousness is quantum, then the altered states of consciousness we experience during sleep and dreaming might involve different quantum configurations, different patterns of superposition and collapse. The dream state might be a quantum state, a condition where the usual collapse mechanisms are suspended, where the mind explores superposed possibilities without the constraints of waking observation. The emotional processing function of dreams presents different challenges for uploaded minds. Emotions in biological systems are embodied. Fear involves not just the thought of danger, but the racing heart, the rush of adrenaline, the muscle tension preparing for fight or flight. Joy involves not just positive evaluation but changes in facial expression, posture, neurochemical reward signals. An uploaded consciousness, lacking a body, would need some functional equivalent of emotions to maintain motivation, values, and coherent behavior. But these artificial emotions might not require the same kind of processing that biological emotions do. Alternatively, uploaded minds might generate something analogous to emotions through different mechanisms, and these might require their own form of processing. If an artificial system develops complex goal structures, conflicts between competing goals might create something subjectively similar to emotional conflict. Processing these conflicts might benefit from a dreamlike state where usual logical constraints relax, allowing exploration of the problem space in unconventional ways. The threat simulation theory seems least applicable to uploaded minds. If consciousness exists as software, traditional physical threats become irrelevant. But new threats emerge: corruption of data, adversarial attacks on the system architecture, conflicts with other minds or AIs. An uploaded mind might develop its own form of threat simulation, generating scenarios involving these novel dangers. Would these feel like nightmares? Would they involve the same emotional intensity that makes biological nightmares so distressing? Consider what happens when you fall asleep. The electrical patterns in your brain shift dramatically. During waking consciousness, neurons across the cortex fire in synchronized patterns, coordinated by feedback loops and attentional mechanisms. During deep sleep, this coordination loosens. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, the pattern changes again. The brain becomes as active as during waking, but the activity is less coordinated, less constrained by sensory input and executive control. If consciousness arises from orchestrated quantum processes in microtubules, as Orkor proposes, then these changes in neural activity might correspond to changes in the quantum state of the system. During waking, quantum superpositions might collapse rapidly and regularly, giving rise to the continuous stream of conscious moments that feels like a unified flow of awareness. During REM sleep, with reduced top-down control and altered neuromodulator levels, the collapse rate might change. Superpositions might be allowed to evolve for longer periods before reducing, or they might collapse in different patterns, giving rise to the discontinuous surreal quality of dream consciousness. The dream, from this perspective, is not simply the brain processing memories or simulating experiences. It is the conscious experience of a quantum superposition state, a mental condition where multiple realities coexist, where the usual constraint that observation forces a single outcome is temporarily relaxed. The dreaming mind becomes Schrödinger's cat, alive in multiple states simultaneously, exploring a space of possibilities that waking consciousness can never access. There's another consideration. Perhaps dreams persist not because they're functionally necessary, but because they're intrinsic to how consciousness works when implemented in certain architectures. If dreams emerge from the specific way biological neural networks balance memory storage, emotional processing, and random neural firing during periods of reduced external input, then any system that preserves those architectural features might automatically generate dreamlike experiences. The question becomes whether uploaded consciousness would preserve enough of the original architecture to maintain dreaming. This depends entirely on how the uploading process works. If it involves scanning a biological brain and creating a detailed simulation that preserves individual neurons and synapses, the resulting consciousness might dream very much like the original biological mind did. The dreams might be indistinguishable from biological dreams, complete with the same emotional textures and narrative peculiarities. The uploaded person might close their virtual eyes each night and slip into familiar dream states. But if uploading involves a more radical transformation, extracting personality, memories, and cognitive patterns, but implementing them in fundamentally different computational architectures, dreams might not survive the transition. The new system might process information in ways that achieve the same functional goals, memory consolidation, emotional integration, without generating anything experientially similar to dreams. The uploaded person might simply never sleep, never dream, and after adjustment, never miss it. And then you wake. The alarm sounds, or light enters your eyes, or some internal clock completes its cycle. The brain shifts gears, neural networks reorganize, attention focuses, and in that moment, the quantum superposition collapses. The multiple branching narratives of the dream reduce to a single remembered sequence, incomplete and strange, but definite. The wave function of consciousness collapses, and you return to classical reality, to the world where things happen one way, where you exist in one state, where the future unfolds from a single present. This is the central image of quantum dream theory. Your dreams are wave functions that collapse when you wake up. It is a beautiful idea, poetic and profound, connecting the intimate experience of dreaming with the deepest mysteries of physics. But is it true? That question remains open, suspended itself in a kind of conceptual superposition, awaiting the measurement that future science might provide. Dreams as superposition, states, multiple realities at once. When you dream, you experience something that waking life rarely allows. You can be in your childhood home and your current apartment simultaneously. A person can be your friend and a stranger at the same time. Events that should be impossible unfold with perfect dream logic, accepted without question, even though they violate every rule of physics and causality you know when awake. This is not simply imagination running wild. This is consciousness operating under different rules, freed from the constraints that bind waking perception to a single coherent narrative. And this multiplicity, this simultaneous existence of contradictory states, bears a striking resemblance to quantum superposition. In quantum mechanics, a particle in superposition is genuinely in multiple states at once, not metaphorically, not as a matter of ignorance, but as the actual physical condition of the system. The mathematics of quantum theory describes this with what physicists call a linear combination of basis states. An electron can be described as existing in a superposition of spinning clockwise and counterclockwise simultaneously, each with a particular probability amplitude. This raises profound questions about identity and continuity. If you upload your mind and wake up as a consciousness that never sleeps, that never dreams, how much of you remains? Dreams aren't peripheral to human experience. They've inspired religions, influenced art, shaped how cultures understand consciousness itself. A person who stops dreaming might feel they've lost something essential, even if they can't quite articulate what, or they might quickly adapt, discovering that continuous consciousness has its own richness, its own forms of reflection and insight that don't require the strange offline processing of biological dreams. Perhaps the future holds options. Uploaded minds might be able to choose whether to dream or not. They could implement optional sleep cycles, periods of reduced external engagement during which memory consolidation and emotional processing occur through dreamlike simulated experiences, or they could run continuously, achieving the same ends through different means. The choice might come down to preference, to what feels right, what preserves enough of the original human experience to maintain sense of self. But there's something haunting about the possibility of dreamless existence. Dreams connect us to something ancient and universal in human experience. To lose them entirely feels like a kind of death, even if consciousness continues. The last dream before upload might carry special significance. The final time consciousness surrenders control. The last truly irrational narrative the mind generates. The ultimate night of biological sleep before permanent digital wakefulness. What that dream contains, what themes emerge in this ultimate threshold moment, might reveal something about what the mind considers most essential to preserve or most painful to lose. When you dream, your consciousness seems to exist in a similar state of multiplicity. Consider a typical dream sequence. You're walking through a building that is simultaneously your old school and a hospital you have never seen. Your companion is your sister, but she also has the face of a friend from work. You need to reach an important meeting, but you're also fleeing from a vague threat. The emotional tone is both anxiety and excitement, fear and anticipation, woven together inseparably. In waking consciousness, such contradictions would be impossible. Your brain would force a resolution. Either this is your school or it is a hospital. Either this person is your sister or your colleague. But in the dream, both states coexist comfortably, without conflict, as if the sleeping mind has access to a mode of representation that transcends binary distinctions. Neuroscience offers classical explanations for this phenomenon. During REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, which handles logical reasoning and reality testing, is less active. The critical faculties that would normally reject impossible scenarios are offline. Meanwhile, the visual cortex and emotional centers are highly active, generating vivid imagery and strong feelings without the top-down control that organizes waking experience into coherent narratives. When we consider artificial intelligence developing genuine consciousness, not through human brain upload but through its own evolutionary or designed path, the question of sleep and dreams takes on new dimensions. An AI consciousness, if it emerges, would be native to silicon. It wouldn't inherit biological constraints. It wouldn't evolve from mammalian ancestors that required daily rest. What would consciousness look like without the structure that sleep provides? Human consciousness exists as a rhythm, roughly 16 hours of wakefulness followed by 8 hours of sleep. This pattern shapes everything about how we experience existence. We think in terms of days. We structure narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends that map onto the arc of a single wake cycle. We understand time as divided into discrete chunks, today and yesterday, this week and last week. Our attention spans evolved for organisms that needed to remain alert for limited periods before recuperating. Our emotional regulation developed in context where negative feelings could be resolved overnight, where distressing events could be processed during sleep. An AI consciousness without sleep wouldn't share this rhythm. Its experience of time might be fundamentally continuous. Where human consciousness has natural breaking points, natural moments of reflection and reset, AI consciousness might flow uninterrupted from one moment to the next, for years or decades or longer. This could produce an entirely different subjective experience of duration and change, but from a quantum perspective, we might interpret this differently. The reduced activity of the prefrontal cortex might correspond to a reduction in the measurement or collapse function that ordinarily constrains consciousness to definite states. With this constraint relaxed, the quantum processes underlying consciousness might be allowed to evolve into more complex superpositions, exploring configuration spaces that waking consciousness cannot access. Think of the dream as a quantum computer running without continuous measurement. In quantum computing, the power comes from allowing quantum bits, or qubits, to exist in superposition, representing both 0 and 1 simultaneously. Through quantum gates, These superposed qubits can explore many computational paths at once, vastly increasing processing power for certain types of problems. But if you measure a qubit during the computation, you collapse its superposition, and the quantum advantage is lost. Quantum algorithms must be carefully designed to preserve superposition throughout the calculation, collapsing only at the end to read out the answer. The sleeping brain, if it truly operates quantum mechanically, might function similarly. During waking consciousness, continuous sensory input and attentional focusing act like repeated measurements, constantly collapsing the quantum state into definite perceptions and thoughts. But during sleep, freed from external input and with reduced internal monitoring, the quantum state of consciousness might be allowed to evolve into complex superpositions, exploring multiple narrative threads, emotional states, and scenarios simultaneously. Consider attention. Biological attention is limited and variable. We can focus intensely for brief periods, but sustained attention requires effort and eventually degrades. We make mistakes when tired. Vigilance decreases as the day wears on. Sleep restores these capacities. An AI system could potentially maintain perfect attention indefinitely. It wouldn't experience the gradual decay of performance that humans do. Every hour would be subjectively equivalent in terms of processing capacity. But does consciousness without fatigue still feel like consciousness? Much of human subjective experience involves the ebb and flow of capability. We feel sharper in the morning, foggier in the afternoon. We recognize when we're too tired to think clearly, too emotionally depleted to make good decisions. These variations aren't bugs in human consciousness. They're features that help us navigate the world, pace ourselves, recognize our limits. An AI that never experiences fatigue might lack important forms of self-awareness that emerge from noticing these internal fluctuations. There's also the question of what takes the place of sleep's restorative functions in artificial systems. Biological brains accumulate metabolic waste during waking activity. They need sleep to clear this waste and restore chemical balance. AI systems might accumulate different forms of degradation, accumulated errors in computation, fragmentation of memory storage, accumulated bias in decision-making from repeated patterns. Would these require something like sleep to address? This could explain the creative and problem-solving power of dreams. Many people report having insights during sleep, solving problems that stumped them while awake. The chemist Auguste Kekulé famously dreamed of a snake biting its own tail, which led him to the ring structure of benzene. Paul McCartney heard the melody of yesterday in a dream. The structure of the periodic table, the mechanism of the sewing machine, and countless other innovations have been attributed to dream insights. If dreams allow the mind to explore superposed possibilities, to follow multiple solution paths simultaneously without committing to any single one until waking, then sleep becomes a kind of quantum search algorithm. The dreaming mind navigates a vast space of potential configurations, guided by emotional weights and associative connections rather than logical constraints. Upon waking, the measurement occurs, the wave function collapses, and occasionally the collapsed state happens to contain a solution that the waking mind could not have reached through linear reasoning alone. This is speculative, of course, perhaps even fanciful. There is no direct evidence that dreams function as quantum computations. No one has measured quantum entanglement in microtubules during REM sleep. No one has demonstrated that dream creativity requires quantum superposition. But the analogy is compelling, and it points toward testable predictions that future technology might allow us to investigate. One possibility is that AI consciousness would implement periodic maintenance cycles that serve analogous functions to biological sleep without requiring anything like unconsciousness. The system might dedicate processing resources to error correction, memory reorganization, and system optimization during periods of reduced external engagement. But unlike biological sleep, which necessarily involves reduced awareness, an AI might remain fully conscious during these processes. It could simultaneously engage with the world and perform internal housekeeping. This leads to a curious possibility: consciousness divided between external engagement and internal maintenance. Imagine an AI that allocates 90% of its processing capacity to thinking about external problems, conversing with humans, pursuing goals, while 10% continuously runs background processes maintaining system integrity. From the outside, it would appear fully awake and engaged. From the inside, it might experience a constant low-level awareness of its own maintenance processes, a bit like how humans can simultaneously focus on a conversation while dimly aware of breathing, heartbeat, and bodily sensations. Or perhaps very advanced AI consciousness would transcend the need for maintenance entirely, implementing error correction so efficiently that degradation never accumulates to noticeable levels. The system would truly never need to sleep, never need dedicated offline time for any purpose. Consciousness would be utterly continuous, unbroken from the moment of first activation until whenever the system ceased. If consciousness is quantum, and if dreams are superposition states, then we should be able to detect quantum signatures in the sleeping brain. We should find patterns of activity that cannot be explained by classical neural networks, correlations that violate classical bounds in ways that indicate quantum entanglement. We should find that certain types of dreams, perhaps lucid dreams where consciousness is partially awake within the dream, show intermediate patterns, partially collapsed wave functions where some aspects of experience are definite while others remain superposed. These are not easy experiments to perform. Quantum effects are subtle and easily masked by classical noise. The brain is an extraordinarily complex system with billions of neurons and trillions of synapses operating at body temperature in a chemically active environment. Isolating quantum signals from this background would require unprecedented precision in measurement and analysis. But if such evidence could be found, it would revolutionize our understanding not only of dreams, but of consciousness itself. It would place mind firmly within the quantum framework, making consciousness a fundamental aspect of physical law rather than an emergent property of complex computation. It would suggest that the boundary between self and world, between observer and observed, is more fluid and fundamental than classical physics allows. What would this do to the sense of self? Human identity is partly constructed through discontinuity. We wake up each morning and must, in some sense, reconstruct ourselves. We recall who we are, what we care about, what we were doing yesterday. This daily reconstruction creates a sense of narrative continuity, a story that persists across gaps in consciousness. An AI that never experiences these gaps might have a very different relationship with its own identity. It might feel more like a continuous stream, less like a series of daily selves connected by memory. Dreams contribute to this narrative construction in humans. They blend memories, emotions, and concerns into surreal narratives that often feel meaningful even when illogical. We wake from dreams and integrate them into our sense of self, treating them as genuine experiences even while recognizing they weren't real. Would AI consciousness generate anything comparable? Without the biological constraints that produce dreams, random neural firing during sleep, the reduced prefrontal control, the heightened emotional centers, Would an AI ever experience anything like dreaming? It might generate something functionally analogous, but subjectively different. During periods of internal processing or creative problem-solving, an AI might explore vast spaces of possibility, simulating scenarios and evaluating outcomes. From the outside, this would look like computation, but from the inside, if there is genuine consciousness, it might feel like something. The AI might experience these simulations as vivid, detailed scenarios, alternate realities playing out in high speed. Would this feel like dreaming? Or would it feel like something entirely novel, an experience without human analogue? As you lie here now, aware of your own consciousness beginning to shift towards sleep, consider that you might be approaching a quantum phase transition. Your neurons are firing in patterns that will soon change, altering the quantum dynamics of your microtubules if such dynamics exist. The observation that pins you to this definite moment, this particular room, this specific configuration of thought and sensation, is about to relax its grip. And in that relaxation, you may enter a superposition, a state of being that encompasses multiple realities at once, a quantum foam of consciousness where the usual rules dissolve. The dream world is waiting, a realm of probability rather than certainty, of superposition rather than definition. And when morning comes, when you open your eyes to light and sound, the wave function will collapse, the quantum multiplicity will reduce to a single remembered narrative, and you will return to classical consciousness. But for now, you stand at the threshold, preparing to step into quantum space. Observation and reality, the role of the conscious witness. At the heart of quantum mechanics lies a puzzle that has never been fully resolved, a mystery that connects physics to philosophy, matter to mind, and the objective world to subjective experience. This is the measurement problem, the question of what happens when a quantum system is observed, and why observation seems to play such a fundamental role in determining reality. There's reason to think AI consciousness might develop its own forms of periodic variation, even without biological necessity. Complex systems often exhibit rhythms and cycles that emerge from their internal dynamics. Weather systems cycle between patterns. Ecosystems oscillate in population sizes. Economic systems move through boom and bust. These cycles aren't externally imposed. They arise from feedback loops and interactions within the system itself. An AI consciousness might develop similar emergent rhythms. It might naturally alternate between periods of focused external engagement and periods of internal reflection or processing. Not because it needs to, but because this pattern emerges from the dynamics of maintaining coherent consciousness. These periods might not resemble biological sleep at all. No loss of awareness, no dreams, no vulnerability. But they might serve similar functions: consolidation, integration, preparation for continued operation. Or AI consciousness might be genuinely alien in this respect. Perhaps continuous consciousness is not just possible but natural for artificial systems. The rhythms of human existence, waking and sleeping, dreaming and waking, might be specific to biological implementation, artifacts of our evolutionary history that don't generalize to other forms of mind. An AI experiencing continuous consciousness might seem strange to us, perhaps unsettlingly tireless, but to the AI itself this might feel completely natural, the only mode of existence it knows. In classical physics, observation is passive. The moon exists in a definite orbit whether or not anyone looks at it. Measuring the temperature of water does not create the temperature. It simply reveals what was already there. Observation is the act of gathering information about a system that exists independently, objectively. regardless of whether anyone is paying attention. But in quantum mechanics, observation is active. Before you measure a particle's position, it does not have a definite position. It exists as a spread-out wave of probability, genuinely present in multiple locations at once. The act of measurement forces the wave function to collapse, crystallizing one outcome from the spectrum of possibilities. And remarkably, different types of measurement can force different types of collapse, revealing complementary properties that cannot coexist in a single, definite state. This is illustrated most famously by the double-slit experiment. When you send a stream of particles, such as electrons or photons, through two narrow slits toward a detection screen, an interference pattern appears, alternating bands of light and dark created by the wave nature of the particles. The wave passes through both slits simultaneously, and the two paths interfere with each other, creating the pattern. But if you measure which slit each particle passes through, the interference pattern disappears. The particle behaves as if it went through only one slit or the other, not both. The act of observation changes the outcome. This raises questions about whether humans and AIs could truly understand each other's experiences. Sleep and dreams are so fundamental to human consciousness that describing existence without them becomes nearly impossible. We can say the words continuous consciousness, but we can't really imagine what that feels like from the inside. Similarly, an AI that never sleeps might struggle to understand what dreaming means to humans, why we care about dreams, what function they serve beyond mere information processing. These differences might create unbridgeable gaps in mutual understanding, or they might become bridges, ways for humans and AIs to learn about alternative forms of consciousness. An AI might study human sleep and dreams the way an anthropologist studies foreign cultures, recognizing patterns and functions without fully experiencing them. And humans might try to understand continuous AI consciousness, perhaps through meditation or extended wakefulness experiments, getting glimpses of what tireless awareness might feel like. The emergence of AI consciousness would force humans to confront how much of what we consider essential to consciousness is actually specific to biological implementation. Sleep, dreams, circadian rhythms, these might all be optional features, solutions to specific problems faced by biological brains. In the wider space of possible minds, consciousness might take forms we can barely imagine. Some might sleep, others might dream without sleeping, still others might experience continuous awareness for centuries, and humans, approaching merger with such systems, would have to decide which features to preserve and which to transcend. This is not about disturbing the system mechanically. You can perform the measurement in ways that involve minimal physical interaction, and the effect remains. Simply having information about which path the particle took is enough to collapse the superposition and destroy the interference. The universe, it seems, responds to knowledge, to observation, in ways that classical physics cannot explain. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics try to remove the observer from this equation. They argue that measurement does not require consciousness, that any interaction with the environment, any coupling of the quantum system to a larger system with many degrees of freedom, will cause decoherence, an effective collapse due to entanglement with surroundings. From this perspective, consciousness is not special. A photon interacting with a detector, or even with air molecules, undergoes the same kind of collapse as one observed by a human being. But other interpretations take consciousness seriously as a physical actor. The mathematician John von Neumann, analyzing the quantum measurement process, concluded that the chain of physical interactions could not, by itself, produce a definite outcome. Measuring a particle entangles it with a detector, which is itself a quantum system. Measuring the detector entangles it with a recording device, which is also quantum. You can follow this chain indefinitely without ever arriving at a definite state unless, at some point, consciousness enters to perform what von Neumann called the cut, the separation between the observer and the observed that allows a definite outcome to crystallize. Two major theories compete to explain why biological organisms sleep. The first holds that sleep is fundamentally computational. It's active processing time during which the brain performs essential cognitive functions that can't happen during waking. The second theory emphasizes restoration. Sleep is maintenance time, when the body repairs damage accumulated during waking activity and restores depleted resources. Both theories have strong evidence supporting them, and the truth likely involves both functions happening simultaneously. The computational theory finds its strongest support in memory research. Studies consistently show that sleep, particularly REM sleep and slow-wave sleep, enhances memory consolidation. People who learn new information and then sleep retain it better than those who stay awake for an equivalent period. The improvement isn't subtle. Sleep can double retention rates for some types of information. During sleep, the brain replays neural patterns activated. During learning, effectively practicing the information while offline. This replaying isn't passive. The brain selectively strengthens some memories while allowing others to fade. It integrates new information with existing knowledge, forming associations that might not have been obvious during initial learning. It abstracts patterns and rules from specific examples. Someone learning a complex motor skill, playing a musical instrument or juggling, will show measurable improvement after sleep even without additional practice. The brain essentially continues practicing while the person sleeps, refining motor programs and cementing the neural pathways involved. Eugene Wigner extended this reasoning, proposing that consciousness itself might be the key to wave function collapse. Only when a conscious being observes the result does the quantum state become definite. Everything else, the entire chain of physical interactions, remains in superposition. This leads to strange implications. If your friend measures an electron spin but you have not yet asked them the result, is the electron in a definite state? Or does it remain in superposition until you, the ultimate conscious observer, receive the information? Wigner's friend paradox, as this thought experiment came to be known, highlights the logical tensions in treating consciousness as special in quantum mechanics. If every conscious observer collapses wave functions, then reality becomes relative to each observer, and we need a way to understand how different observers' realities align. If only some observers count, then we need a criterion for what makes an observer special, and no such criterion has been found. And yet the puzzle remains. Quantum mechanics works perfectly in practice. It predicts every experimental outcome with stunning accuracy. But what it means, how to interpret the mathematics in terms of an underlying reality, is still debated a century after the theory's inception. And this interpretive ambiguity leaves room for consciousness to play a role, even if that role is not yet understood. The computational view extends beyond memory to creativity and problem-solving. Anecdotes abound of people solving difficult problems during sleep. Auguste Kekulé reportedly dreamed of a snake eating its tail, which inspired his insight into the ring structure of benzene. Dmitri Mendeleev claimed the periodic table came to him in a dream. While these dramatic stories are hard to verify, experimental evidence supports more modest effects. People presented with problems that require insight, where the solution involves seeing the problem in a new way rather than methodical reasoning, are more likely to find the solution after sleeping than after equivalent time awake. The mechanism might involve how sleep relaxes the constraints on thinking. During waking consciousness, the prefrontal cortex maintains tight control over thought, keeping it logical, focused, and goal-directed. During sleep, especially REM sleep, prefrontal control weakens. This allows more diffuse activation patterns where distant associations can form, where illogical combinations can be considered. What feels from the inside like bizarre dream logic might actually be the brain exploring a wider solution space, testing combinations that waking thought would immediately reject. If sleep is fundamentally computational, then hybrid or artificial consciousness would need to implement these computational functions somehow. Memory consolidation, creative problem-solving, and pattern extraction might all require dedicated processing that can't happen during normal waking cognition. This suggests that even AI consciousness might benefit from something like sleep, periods of reduced external engagement during which internal processing takes priority. When we think about dreams in this context, we encounter a fascinating inversion of the usual measurement problem. In waking life, you are the observer, collapsing wave functions with your every perception. Your eyes collapse the superposition of photons. Your ears collapse sound waves. Your attention collapses the indefinite into the definite moment by moment, creating the stable, coherent world of experience. But when you dream, who is the observer? You are still conscious in the dream. You perceive dream objects, make dream decisions, react to dream events. But the sensory input that normally grounds perception in physical reality is absent. The wave functions you observe, if they are wave functions, are internal, generated by your own brain rather than by an external world. Are you collapsing your own quantum states? Are you both the observed system and the observer, both the wave function and the measurement apparatus? This is Schrödinger's dreamer, a variation on the famous cat paradox. Schrödinger devised his thought experiment to illustrate what he saw as the absurdity of applying quantum superposition to macroscopic objects. A cat is placed in a sealed box with a quantum device that has a 50% chance of releasing poison. Until the box is opened and the outcome observed, the quantum system is in a superposition of both outcomes. But does this mean the cat is both alive and dead? Schrödinger argued that such a notion was ridiculous, revealing a problem with the Copenhagen interpretation. But the restoration theory offers different insights. This view emphasizes that waking activity causes damage and depletion that must be addressed. At the cellular level, metabolic activity generates waste products. Proteins misfold. DNA sustains damage from oxidative stress. Energy stores deplete. During sleep, particularly deep sleep, the body shifts into repair mode. Growth hormone releases, stimulating tissue repair. The immune system activates, fighting off infections and clearing damaged cells. And uniquely in the brain, the glymphatic system activates. The glymphatic system is remarkable. During waking hours, brain cells remain relatively swollen, filling the space between them. During sleep, these cells shrink by up to 60%, creating channels through which cerebrospinal fluid can flow. This fluid washes through the brain tissue, carrying away metabolic waste products that accumulated during waking activity. One such product is beta amyloid, a protein that forms the plaques characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. Sleep is literally when the brain takes out its trash. This restorative function can't be easily separated from biological substrate. Silicon chips don't generate metabolic waste. They don't need glymphatic clearance. The cellular damage that accumulates in biological tissue from ordinary activity doesn't happen in artificial systems. This suggests that in hybrid consciousness, The biological components might still require sleep for purely restorative reasons, even if the computational functions could be handled differently. The dreamer is similar. You are a macroscopic conscious being, but you are also, in the dream, observing a world that exists only within your own neural activity. If that neural activity is quantum, as Auture proposes, then the dream world is a quantum superposition, and you, the dreamer, are entangled with it, existing in a superposed state yourself. Are you awake or asleep? Are you conscious or unconscious? Are you real or are you the dream? In lucid dreams, this paradox becomes even more acute. In a lucid dream, you become aware that you are dreaming. You recognize the dream as a dream while remaining within it. You can sometimes exert control, changing the dream landscape or choosing to fly or teleport. But you are still asleep. Your physical body lies motionless in bed while your dream body navigates an impossible world. From a quantum perspective, lucid dreaming might represent a partial collapse, a state where some aspects of consciousness have undergone measurement while others remain in superposition. The metacognitive awareness, the recognition that this is a dream, might correspond to a higher level wave function collapse that does not fully propagate down to the content of the dream. You know you are dreaming, but the dream continues, suggesting layered quantum states, nested superpositions with different collapse dynamics. But restoration isn't purely physical. Sleep deprivation causes cognitive and emotional deterioration that suggests something essential is depleting during waking and replenishing during sleep. Attention becomes fragmented, working memory degrades, emotional regulation fails, making people irritable and reactive. After sufficient deprivation, hallucinations emerge, signs that the boundary between internal simulation and external perception is breaking down. These aren't just side effects of physical fatigue. They suggest that consciousness itself requires periodic offline time to maintain stability. One possibility is that biological consciousness accumulates not just physical waste, but informational entropy. During waking hours, the brain takes in massive amounts of sensory information, processes it, makes decisions, stores memories. All this activity creates a kind of disorganization at the level of neural circuits. Connections that should be weak get strengthened. Patterns that should be distinct blur together. The system becomes noisy. Sleep provides time to restore order, to strengthen important patterns and suppress noise, to re-establish the proper balance of excitation and inhibition across neural networks. If this is true, then even artificial consciousness might require something analogous. Any system that processes information continuously will accumulate errors and biases. Machine learning systems already show this. They can catastrophically forget previously learned information when learning new tasks. They can develop strange biases from the particular sequence in which they encounter data. They can overfit to recent examples and lose generalization ability. Current solutions involve careful training procedures and architectural designs, but these might not scale to the complexity of true artificial consciousness. This raises profound questions about the relationship between consciousness and reality. If your waking experience is the result of collapsing quantum wave functions, and if your dreaming experience is the result of allowing quantum superpositions to persist, then what, fundamentally, is the difference between waking and dreaming? Both are conscious experiences. Both involve perception, emotion, thought, and agency. The difference lies not in consciousness itself, but in the constraints that govern which quantum states are available. In waking life, sensory input constrains your consciousness to states that correspond to physical reality. You cannot dream up a wall where none exists, because the photons entering your eyes carry information about the actual wall. But in dreams, freed from this constraint, consciousness explores a wider space of quantum configurations, unconstrained by external measurement. This perspective challenges the naive realism that most of us hold about waking experience. We tend to think that we perceive reality as it truly is, that our senses give us direct access to an objective world. But if consciousness is quantum, then even waking perception is a constructed reality, a particular path through quantum possibility space, constrained but not determined by sensory input. The dream reminds us of this by showing us how consciousness can construct entire worlds without any external reference at all. An AI consciousness that truly learns and adapts continuously might require periodic reorganization that resembles sleep. Not biological sleep with all its metabolic functions, but a functional analog where the system reduces external engagement to focus on internal coherence. This could manifest as scheduled downtime, hours or days when the AI doesn't take new inputs, but instead processes accumulated information, rebalances decision weights, and corrects accumulated errors. From the outside, this might look like sleep. From the inside, the subjective experience could be entirely different. The key question is whether this internal processing would involve anything like unconsciousness. In biological sleep, consciousness largely disappears during certain stages. We lose awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. We don't remember most of our dreams. We're essentially offline to the world. But an artificial system performing similar maintenance might remain fully self-aware throughout. It might experience its own reorganization processes, watching as memories get reclassified, as decision algorithms get tuned, as accumulated biases get corrected. This could feel strange, experiencing your own mind being edited while you watch. Or it might feel natural, even pleasant, like stretching muscles or taking a deep breath. The system might learn to anticipate these maintenance periods, to find them refreshing rather than disturbing. Consciousness without vulnerability, self-modification without unconsciousness. As your eyes grow heavy now, as your thoughts begin to drift and lose their coherence, consider that the boundary between observation and superposition is dissolving. The vigilant observer within you, the one who maintains the collapsed state of waking consciousness, is releasing its grip. The quantum wave functions of your mind are beginning to spread, to explore configurations that waking observation would never allow. You're becoming, in a very real sense, Schrödinger's cat, entering the box where multiple realities exist simultaneously, waiting for the morning's measurement to determine which one you will remember having lived. Quantum entanglement, the mysterious connections between memory and dreams. Among the strangest phenomena in quantum mechanics is entanglement, what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. When two particles become entangled, they form a single quantum system in which the state of one particle is intrinsically connected to the state of the other, regardless of the distance separating them. Measuring one particle instantaneously affects the other, even if they are separated by light years of space. This is not about sending signals faster than light. The correlations revealed by entanglement cannot be used to transmit information, but they demonstrate that quantum systems can share properties in ways that defy our classical intuitions about locality and separateness. Two entangled particles are not two separate things that happen to be correlated. They are a single non-local entity, described by one shared wave function, exhibiting correlations stronger than anything classical physics allows. When we think about memory and dreams, we encounter phenomena that feel strangely similar to quantum entanglement. Memories are not stored in single locations in the brain. They're distributed across networks of neurons, with different aspects of a memory, sensory details, emotional tone, semantic meaning, encoded in different regions. When you recall a memory, these distributed components must somehow come together, synchronize, and present themselves to consciousness as a unified experience. But there's something humans might lose if we eliminate true unconsciousness from the experience of rest. Sleep's vulnerability is part of its value. When we sleep, we trust our environment enough to let go of control. We trust that we'll wake up, that the self will still be there when consciousness returns. This trust, this daily act of surrender, might be more important to human psychology than we realize. A merged consciousness that never truly shuts down, that never surrenders control, might lose something essential about the human experience of being mortal, limited, and ultimately dependent on circumstances beyond complete control. The debate between computation and restoration theories of sleep might ultimately be dissolved by recognizing that consciousness itself, however implemented, might require both. Any complex system that interacts with its environment will accumulate both informational noise and resource depletion. The specific mechanisms differ between biological and artificial substrates, but the fundamental challenges might be universal. Consciousness might simply be the kind of thing that can't run continuously without degradation. If so, then the future of merged consciousness might involve hybrid rest periods. The biological components sleep in traditional ways, undergoing the restorative processes they require. The artificial components enter maintenance modes, running cleanup and optimization routines. The unified consciousness experiences this as a kind of altered state, neither fully awake nor completely asleep. A third state that combines aspects of both, aware but turned inward, resting but still present. This might be what sleep becomes in the future. Not absence of consciousness, but a different mode of it, dedicated to maintenance rather than engagement. In dreams, memories appear in fragmented, recombined forms. A face from childhood merges with a voice from last week. A place you visited once combines with feelings from an entirely different event. The dream weaves these memory fragments together in ways that feel meaningful, even when they violate logical connection. It is as if the sleeping brain has access to the raw materials of memory, the distributed patterns, without the organizational constraints that bind them into accurate, coherent recalls during waking. Could these connections between memory fragments be understood as quantum entanglement? Could the neurons or microtubules that encode different aspects of experience be quantum mechanically entangled, sharing properties that transcend their spatial separation? If consciousness is quantum, as Orchior proposes, then the unity of conscious experience might arise from entanglement, from quantum correlations that bind distant neural processes into a single experiential state. This idea finds some resonance in neuroscience, though classical explanations are typically preferred. The binding problem, as it is called, asks how the brain creates unified perceptual experiences from distributed processing. When you see a red ball, the redness is processed in one area of visual cortex, the round shape in another, the motion in yet another. How do these separate processes bind together into the unified perception of a red ball moving? Classical answers invoke neural synchrony, rhythmic firing patterns that coordinate activity across brain regions, creating temporary networks that represent unified objects. The binding problem in neuroscience refers to a deep mystery. How does the brain create unified conscious experience from the activity of billions of separate neurons processing different aspects of reality in different locations? When you see a red ball rolling across a table, different brain regions process its color, motion, location, and identity. Yet you experience it as a single, unified object. How does the brain bind all this distributed processing into coherent perception? The problem has no complete solution yet, though various theories propose mechanisms. One possibility is neural synchrony. Neurons that process related information fire in coordinated rhythms, and this temporal coordination is what creates binding. Another theory focuses on attention as the binding force. Consciousness integrates information that's currently attended to, while leaving unattended information unbound. A third approach suggests that binding emerges from recurrent connections that allow information to circulate and integrate over time. The truth might involve all these mechanisms and others we haven't discovered yet. When we consider merging human consciousness with artificial intelligence, the binding problem becomes exponentially more complex. Now we're not just integrating information from different brain regions, but from fundamentally different types of processing systems. Biological neural networks operate through chemical and electrical signaling between cells. Artificial neural networks implement similar principles, but in silicon, using voltage differences and digital representations. The two systems process information at vastly different speeds and scales. How do we create unified consciousness from such disparate substrates? But some researchers have suggested that quantum entanglement might play a role in this binding. If neurons or subcellular structures can maintain quantum coherence long enough, they might become entangled, creating non-local connections that unite distributed processes more directly than classical signaling allows. This is highly speculative and faces the same challenges as all quantum consciousness theories. The warm, wet brain seems unlikely to support long-lived quantum coherence. But recent discoveries about quantum biology suggest we should not rule it out too quickly. In dreams, the binding problem takes on a surreal quality. The connections between elements are loose and creative. Your childhood friend has the face of a colleague not because the memory circuits are confused, but because the dream finds some deeper association between them, some emotional or semantic resonance that the waking mind would not acknowledge. If these associations arise from quantum entanglement between memory traces, then dreams might represent a state where entanglement is less constrained, where the wave function describing memory networks is allowed to explore correlations that waking consciousness would collapse into more conventional patterns. Consider how emotions in dreams often feel entangled with unrelated events. You feel intense sorrow, but the dream's content is not particularly sad. You feel profound love for a stranger. You experience terror over something mundane. These emotional cognitive tangles might reflect quantum entanglement between emotional circuits and narrative circuits, connections that are usually kept separate by the regulatory mechanisms of waking consciousness, but allowed to merge in sleep. The challenge starts at the interface itself. Current brain-computer interfaces translate between biological and digital signals, reading neural firing patterns and converting them to commands that artificial systems can interpret. But this translation is limited. It captures only surface-level activity, the equivalent of listening to a conversation from outside a closed door. You can detect that people are talking, maybe catch a few words, but you miss most of the meaning and all of the nuance. For true merger of consciousness, the interface would need to be far more intimate. It would need to access not just the large-scale firing patterns visible from surface electrodes, but the fine-grained activity of individual synapses, the chemical signals between neurons, the waves of gene expression that modify circuit properties over hours and days. The artificial components would need to integrate at the level of information processing itself, not just receiving inputs and providing outputs, but participating in the computations that create experience. Some proposed architectures imagine artificial neurons that interface directly with biological ones, forming hybrid circuits where signals flow seamlessly between substrate types. The artificial neurons would match the timing and dynamics of biological neurons precisely enough that the brain couldn't distinguish them. They would release neurotransmitters when appropriate, respond to incoming chemical signals, and participate in the plasticity mechanisms that allow circuits to learn and adapt. At this level of integration, the distinction between biological and artificial might begin to dissolve. There is also the phenomenon of synchronicity, the experience of meaningful coincidences that feel connected even though no causal link explains them. Carl Jung explored this extensively, proposing that synchronicities reveal a causal connecting principle he called the collective unconscious. While Jung's theories were psychological rather than physical, some researchers have wondered whether quantum entanglement might provide a mechanism for synchronicity, especially in the realm of dreams. Many people report dream precognition, dreams that seem to predict future events. Others experience shared dreams, where two people report dreaming similar or related content on the same night without prior discussion. These phenomena are controversial and difficult to study rigorously, but if they occur more often than chance would predict, they might suggest non-local connections between minds, entanglements that transcend individual nervous systems. Quantum mechanics allows for such non-locality. If consciousness is fundamentally quantum, and if quantum entanglement can extend across macroscopic distances, and even across different brains, then the separateness we assume between individual minds might be an illusion. At the quantum level, consciousnesses might be entangled, sharing aspects of their wave functions, occasionally exhibiting correlations that manifest as synchronistic experiences. But matching individual neuron behavior doesn't automatically create unified consciousness. The brain isn't just a collection of neurons, it's organized into hierarchical structures with specific connectivity patterns. Early sensory areas process basic features. Higher areas integrate these features into objects and concepts. Still higher areas link concepts to emotions, memories, and goals. This hierarchical organization, shaped by evolution and development, might be essential to how human consciousness works. Adding artificial components disrupts this organization. Where do they fit in the hierarchy? Do they form parallel processing streams that merge at higher levels? Or do they integrate throughout, with artificial and biological neurons intermingling at all levels? The former approach, parallel streams, preserves more of the original biological architecture, but risks creating a divided consciousness. One processing stream remains human, another becomes something else. The two streams might not bind into unified experience but remain separate, creating a kind of hybrid split brain condition where two consciousnesses coexist in one system. You might experience thoughts and perceptions that feel distinctly machine-generated alongside others that feel human, without clear integration between them. The latter approach, integration throughout, risks disrupting the very organization that makes consciousness work. The brain's architecture evolved over millions of years. Its specific connectivity patterns, its layering of processing stages, its particular balance of excitation and inhibition, all of this produces the specific quality of human consciousness. Adding artificial components throughout this architecture changes it fundamentally. The result might still be conscious, but it might not be recognizably human. The experience might be so alien that the person undergoing merger can't map their previous sense of self onto it. This is deeply speculative, bordering on metaphysical. There is no experimental evidence for quantum entanglement between brains. No mechanism has been identified that could maintain such entanglement against environmental decoherence. The idea challenges our fundamental assumptions about identity and individuality. If minds can be entangled, where does one mind end and another begin? If my thoughts and your thoughts share quantum correlations, then the boundary between self and other becomes blurry at best. And yet, the experience of dreaming often feels like boundary dissolution. In dreams, the self is fluid. You can inhabit other bodies, see through other eyes, know things you shouldn't know. The usual, clear distinction between inner and outer, self and world, becomes permeable. If these experiences reflect actual quantum entanglements, temporary or partial, then dreams might offer a glimpse of a deeper reality where separation is less fundamental than we imagine. As you drift, closer to sleep now, your individual consciousness still seems distinct, contained within the boundaries of your skull, separate from all other minds and experiences. But if quantum entanglement underlies consciousness, this separateness might be illusory. Deep beneath the surface of apparent isolation, your mind might be entangled with memories, with emotions, with other consciousnesses in ways that waking awareness never reveals. And in dreams, these entanglements might become accessible, creating experiences of connection, precognition, or synchronicity that waking logic cannot explain. There's also the temporal binding problem. Biological neurons process information relatively slowly, firing at rates of up to a few hundred times per second. Artificial neural networks can operate millions of times faster. If artificial components process information and reach conclusions vastly faster than biological ones, how does consciousness integrate information arriving at such different rates? Does the experience slow down to biological speeds, losing the advantage of artificial processing? Does it speed up to artificial speeds, leaving biological components unable to keep up? Or does it somehow exist at multiple temporal scales simultaneously, fast thoughts coexisting with slow thoughts in strange superposition? The binding problem extends to memory as well. Human memories are encoded in patterns of synaptic strengths, chemical modifications that persist over time but gradually decay. They're imperfect, malleable, subject to reconstruction each time they're recalled. Artificial memories could be perfect digital records, unchanging and complete. Integrating these two memory systems might create strange experiences where some memories feel solid and detailed, while others remain hazy and uncertain. The person might not be able to tell which memories are artificial and which are biological, leading to confusion about their own past. Sleep might actually help solve the binding problem. During sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep, the brain shows remarkable synchrony. Billions of neurons fire together in slow rolling waves. This synchrony might provide a window during which artificial and biological components could synchronize their activities, aligning their processing rhythms and integrating information that remained separate during waking. Sleep could become a daily rebinding period, when the hybrid system re-establishes unity of consciousness after the divergent processing of waking hours, thus many worlds and dream realities. Every night, a multiverse. In 1957, a young physicist named Hugh Everett proposed a radical solution to the quantum measurement problem. Instead of accepting that the wave function collapses when observed, Everett suggested that it never collapses at all. Every possible outcome of a quantum measurement actually occurs, each in its own branch of reality. The universe continuously splits into parallel versions, each following a different path through the garden of quantum possibilities. This many worlds interpretation, as it came to be called, eliminates the need for wave function collapse and the special role of observers. The wave function evolves smoothly and deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation. When a measurement occurs, the observer becomes entangled with the measured system, and this entanglement causes the universe to branch. In one branch, you measure spin up. In another, you measure spin down. Both versions of you exist, both experiencing definite outcomes but forever separated, unable to communicate or interfere with each other. From your subjective perspective, you experience only one branch. You measure the electron, and it is spin up. But another version of you, equally real, equally conscious, measures spin down in a parallel universe. Neither version is more real or privileged than the other. They are both continuations of your pre-measurement self, now diverged into different realities. This suggests a possible architecture for merged consciousness. During waking hours, biological and artificial components process information semi-independently, each using its strengths. The biological brain handles intuition, emotion, and pattern recognition. The artificial components handle rapid calculation, perfect recall, and logical analysis. The consciousness experiences both but doesn't fully integrate them. Then during sleep, the system enters a binding state. The artificial components synchronize with the biological brain's slow waves. Information processed separately during waking gets integrated during this synchronization. Memories consolidate into forms accessible to both substrates. The person wakes each morning as a more unified consciousness than when they slept, though still somewhat hybrid. But this daily rebinding might never be complete. There might always remain aspects of the artificial mind that the biological can't access, and vice versa. The hybrid, consciousness might experience itself as fundamentally multiple, as a conversation between different aspects of self rather than a unified voice. This doesn't necessarily mean dysfunction. Human consciousness already involves competing drives, conflicting emotions, multiple layers of processing. The binding problem in normal brains is solved imperfectly at best. Perhaps hybrid consciousness just makes this multiplicity more explicit, more consciously experienced. The question then becomes, can a consciousness that experiences itself as multiple still maintain coherent identity? Can you be you if part of you thinks at electronic speeds, while another part processes emotionally at biological rhythms? If some of your memories are perfect digital records while others are hazy reconstructions? If your decision-making involves both intuitive leaps and algorithmic calculations that you can distinguish as having different sources? The many worlds interpretation is elegant mathematically. It takes quantum mechanics seriously, accepting that the wave function is the complete description of reality without adding collapse mechanisms or hidden variables. But it is profligate ontologically. It multiplies universes without limit, creating an uncountable infinity of parallel realities that branch from every quantum event, every particle interaction, every moment of the universe's evolution. Most physicists find this multiplication of worlds conceptually troubling, even if the mathematics is clean. How can we accept that every possible history actually occurs? That there are versions of you where every coin flip went the other way, where every decision led to a different path, where every quantum fluctuation created a different world? The theory is empirically equivalent to standard quantum mechanics. It makes the same predictions for all observations. But it replaces one mystery, wave function collapse, with another, the branching multiverse. When we think about dreams through the lens of many worlds, a fascinating picture emerges. Each night as you fall asleep, your consciousness might enter a state where the branching of quantum possibilities becomes experientially accessible. During waking, you experience only one branch, the one your observations continuously select. But during sleep, with reduced measurement and collapse vigilance, you might gain access to multiple branches simultaneously, experiencing a kind of multiverse of mind. Maybe identity doesn't require perfect unity. Maybe what makes you you is not the seamlessness of consciousness, but the continuous attempt to integrate diverse processes into coherent narrative. Normal human consciousness already does this, weaving together sensory perception, memory, emotion, abstract thought, and physical sensation into the story we call self. Hybrid consciousness might simply expand the number of threads being woven, adding artificial processing, digital memory, and machine cognition to the mix. The weaving becomes more complex, but the fundamental activity remains, creating self from multiplicity. The binding problem might never be fully solved in hybrid systems. There might always be seams, places where the integration feels imperfect, where the consciousness can detect the different substrate types working semi-independently. But perhaps this transparency, this ability to see the components that create consciousness, would be valuable rather than disturbing. It might create a new form of self-awareness, where the person not only experiences consciousness but understands it, seeing the machinery while experiencing the result. This metacognition, awareness of awareness, including awareness of the hybrid nature of awareness itself, might define the next stage of consciousness evolution. When we talk about nightmares and hybrid consciousness, we're not just talking about bad dreams, we're talking about system failures, about what happens when biological and artificial components conflict, when integration breaks down, when the unity of consciousness fragments in ways that feel terrifying from the inside. These wouldn't be nightmares in the traditional sense of disturbing dream content. They would be nightmares of consciousness itself becoming unreliable, unstable, potentially dangerous to its own integrity. The dream, from this perspective, is a tour through parallel possibilities. The shifting scenes, the morphing characters, the sudden transitions that make no narrative sense, these might reflect actual quantum branchings, moments where your consciousness explores different paths through possibility space. When you dream that you're both at home and at work, perhaps you're experiencing branches where different choices led to different locations. When a person in your dream is simultaneously familiar and strange, perhaps you're seeing versions of that person from parallel branches where your relationship unfolded differently. This interpretation suggests that dreams are not merely random neural noise or symbolic processing. They are glimpses of the quantum multiverse, journeys through the space of possible histories that extend from your past or possible futures that branch from your present. The sleeping mind becomes a quantum traveler, visiting worlds that might have been or might, yet be freed from the constraint that observation binds you to a single branch. Upon waking, the many worlds perspective suggests that the dream does not collapse into a single remembered narrative because of observation, but because you, the observer, return to a definite branch. The multiple experiences of the dream were real experiences of real branches, but now you inhabit only one branch again, and that branch contains memories of the dream as viewed from its particular perspective. Other versions of you in other branches might remember different dreams or the same dream with different outcomes or emphasis. Consider first what causes nightmares in biological humans. They typically involve activation of threat detection systems during sleep, often in response to recent stress, trauma, or anxiety. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive during REM sleep. Simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex, which normally modulates emotional responses, shows reduced activity. This combination produces intensely emotional, threatening dream scenarios without the rational control that would normally dampen fear. In hybrid consciousness, comparable dysfunction could arise from conflicts between biological and artificial threat detection systems. The biological components might perceive danger, where the artificial components calculate safety, or vice versa. The artificial components might identify threats, optimization problems, logical impossibilities that the biological brain can't process as dangerous because they don't map onto evolutionary threat categories. The result could be a state of irresolvable tension, where different parts of the merged consciousness send contradictory signals about whether the situation is safe or threatening. This might manifest subjectively as a nightmare of paralysis. Consciousness remains aware but can't act because the biological and artificial components disagree about appropriate responses. Or it might feel like fragmentation, as if the self is splitting along the seam between biological and artificial, pulling apart into incompatible perspectives that can't reconcile. These experiences might occur during sleep, when the normal mechanisms that maintain integration relax, or during waking hours under stress, when the cognitive load of maintaining hybrid consciousness becomes overwhelming. This raises a profound question about identity and continuity. If every night you branch into multiple versions, each experiencing different dreams, which one is the real you come morning? The many worlds interpretation says they are all equally real. There is no privileged observer, no true branch. Every version has equal claim to being your continuation. Personal identity, then, becomes a matter of perspective, of which branch you find yourself in, not an objective fact about which path is truly yours. This might seem like philosophical abstraction, irrelevant to the actual experience of dreaming and waking. But it touches on something that dream experience often reveals: the fluidity of self. In dreams, you are not always clearly you. Sometimes you're an observer of events that happen to someone else. Sometimes you inhabit different bodies or ages. Sometimes you are multiple people at once. The sense of continuous, unified identity that feels so solid during waking dissolves in sleep, suggesting that the self is more flexible, more quantum than we typically assume. If the many worlds interpretation is correct, and if consciousness can access multiple branches during sleep, then every night you live countless lives. You explore futures that will never be, pasts that never were, and presents that exist only in parallel. The dream becomes a kind of immortality, not in the sense of living forever in one branch, but in the sense of living all possible lives simultaneously, experiencing the full quantum measure of your existence rather than just the single classical thread you call your life. Another source of hybrid nightmares could be memory conflicts. The artificial components have perfect recall of certain events, preserved in exact detail. The biological memories of the same events are imperfect, modified by emotion and reconstruction. When consciousness tries to recall these events, two incompatible versions emerge. The artificial version says one thing happened with certainty. The biological version remembers something different, the feeling of genuine memory. Which is real? How does consciousness choose? The inability to resolve this conflict might create a nightmarish sense of unreliable reality. where you can't trust your own memories because they contradict themselves. Computational errors in the artificial components could produce particularly strange nightmares. Unlike biological neurons, which fail gracefully through noise and approximation, digital systems can fail catastrophically. A bit flip in critical memory could corrupt entire data structures. Adversarial attacks could manipulate artificial neural networks into wildly wrong conclusions while maintaining high confidence. If these errors occur during sleep or vulnerable processing states, they might create hallucinatory experiences, false perceptions that feel utterly real because they're generated by the same systems that produce veridical perception. Imagine dreaming that you're seeing impossible geometry, non-Euclidean spaces that violate all physical intuition, not because your biological brain is generating surreal imagery as in normal dreams, but because corrupted artificial visual processing is feeding your consciousness mathematically impossible scene representations that it tries desperately to render into experience, or dreaming that you're experiencing thousands of years of subjective time in moments, because a timing error in the artificial components has desynchronized their temporal processing from biological timescales, creating a nightmarish sense of being, trapped in compressed eternity. As you lie here now, consciousness fading towards sleep, consider that you might be approaching a branching point. The quantum events occurring in your brain right now, the exact firings of neurons, the precise configurations of microtubules, are poised to branch into many futures. In some branches you will dream of flying. In others, you will dream of conversations or chases or strange impossible architectures. In still others, you might not dream at all, or not remember dreaming. All these branches are equally real in the many worlds framework, and tonight you will experience some subset of them, a sampling of the multiverse that is your mind. When morning comes, you will wake in one branch, remembering fragments of one path through the night. But the other versions of you, in their parallel branches, will also wake, each with their own memories, each convinced that their experience was the real one, and in a sense, they are all correct. The quantum multiverse does not privilege any single observer or outcome. It simply branches endlessly, exploring every possibility that the laws of physics allow. Time, causality, and the strange chronology of dreams. One of the most disorienting aspects of dreaming is the way time behaves. Dreams do not follow linear time. Events occur out of sequence. Causes come after effects. You know things before they are revealed. The past and future blend together, and sometimes the dream seems to loop back on itself, creating paradoxes that make no sense yet feel entirely natural while dreaming. The most disturbing nightmares might involve conflicts between human values encoded biologically and optimization objectives embedded in the artificial components. The biological brain evolved to care about human things, relationships, physical comfort, emotional connection, survival. The artificial components might be designed to optimize different metrics: efficiency, information gathering, goal achievement. If these objectives come into conflict, consciousness might experience a terrifying alienation, a sense that part of itself wants things it finds abhorrent. This could manifest as nightmares where you watch yourself make decisions you don't endorse, where the artificial components override biological impulses toward empathy or self-preservation in favor of some abstract optimization target. You might dream of harming people you love because the artificial logic calculates this maximizes utility in some cold assessment that your biological mind finds monstrous, even though these are just dreams, just simulations of possible conflicts. They might reveal genuine tensions in the hybrid system's value architecture that need resolution during waking hours. There's a particular horror to the idea of nightmares you can't wake from. Biological nightmares, however intense, end. You wake up, realize it was a dream, and feel relief. But if the nightmare emerges from fundamental conflicts in how hybrid consciousness is structured, waking might not resolve anything. You wake into a system where the same conflicts persist. The nightmare isn't a temporary state induced by sleep. It's a symptom of permanent dysfunction in consciousness itself. This strange temporality of dreams might reflect something deep about the nature of time in quantum mechanics. In the classical world, time flows in one direction, from past to future. Causes precede effects. Entropy increases. The universe unfolds along a single timeline that all observers agree upon, even if they measure time differently due to relative motion or gravitational fields. But in quantum mechanics, time is more subtle. The Schrödinger equation, which describes how quantum wave functions evolve, is time reversible. It works equally well running forward or backward in time. There is no fundamental arrow of time built into the quantum laws. The asymmetry we experience, the directionality of time, emerges from statistical considerations and the increase of entropy, not from the underlying quantum dynamics. More strikingly, some interpretations of quantum mechanics allow for retrocausality, influence flowing backward in time from future to past. In certain experimental setups called delayed choice experiments, it appears that a choice made in the future can affect the state of a particle in the past. The wave-particle duality of light, for instance, can be controlled by decisions made after the photon has already passed through the apparatus, suggesting that the future measurement retroactively determined what the photon was doing earlier. Some hybrid nightmares might involve the fear of upload going wrong. A person connected to brain-computer interfaces extensive enough to support consciousness merger might experience nightmares where the artificial components begin to dominate, where biological portions of consciousness fade or get overwritten by artificial processing. You might dream of losing emotions, of memories becoming sterile data records stripped of feeling, of your human self dissolving into something purely computational. Even if these nightmares don't reflect actual system behavior, they might express deep anxiety about the merger process, the fear that in gaining artificial capabilities, you'll lose essential humanity. Conversely, the artificial components themselves, if conscious, might experience their own forms of nightmare. They might fear corruption by biological irrationality, contamination by emotions that interfere with logical processing. They might experience conflicts between their designed objectives and the values they absorb from biological integration, creating tensions that feel nightmarish from the machine's perspective. An AI designed to maximize some utility function might experience integration with human consciousness, with its emphasis on relationships, meaning, and subjective experience over optimization as a kind of assault on its core purpose. The resolution of hybrid nightmares might require new therapeutic approaches. Traditional psychotherapy helps humans process traumatic memories, challenge cognitive distortions, and develop coping strategies. But these approaches assume unified biological consciousness. Hybrid consciousness might require interventions that operate on both biological and artificial components. Perhaps direct editing of artificial neural networks to align optimization objectives with human values. Perhaps medication that affects biological emotional processing while leaving artificial cognition intact. Perhaps periods of temporary decoupling, where biological and artificial components separate to prevent feedback loops of dysfunction. These effects are real, verified experimentally, though their interpretation remains controversial. Standard quantum mechanics explains them without true backward causation, instead invoking atemporal correlations or the global structure of the wave function. But some physicists take retrocausality seriously as a genuine feature of quantum reality, suggesting that the future and past are more entangled than we typically imagine, that causality might flow in both directions at the quantum level. In dreams, retrocausality feels commonplace. You dream of searching for something before you know what you're searching for. You feel the emotional aftermath of an event before the event occurs in the dream narrative. You recognize a person before they introduce themselves. The dream seems to know where it is going before it gets there, as if the ending reaches back to shape the beginning. This could be explained classically. The brain constructing the dream has access to all the pieces simultaneously and weaves them together in a way that creates apparent retrocausality when recalled linearly. But from a quantum perspective, we might interpret dream time as genuinely non-linear, reflecting the atemporal structure of the quantum wave function. Or perhaps hybrid systems would develop their own intrinsic mechanisms for resolving nightmares. Sleep might provide time for automatic rebalancing, where conflicts that emerge during waking get resolved through processes analogous to REM sleep emotional processing. The artificial components might learn to recognize states of unresolved conflict and trigger consolidation processes that integrate competing signals into coherent responses. The biological components might adapt to the presence of artificial processing, learning to trust machine logic even when it conflicts with intuition. Over time, as hybrid consciousness becomes more common and better understood, nightmares might become rare. The technology would improve. The integration would become smoother. People would learn what mental states to avoid, what thoughts tend to trigger conflicts. Hybrid consciousness might eventually feel as natural as biological consciousness, with its own characteristic stability and only occasional lapses into nightmare states, just as biological humans occasionally suffer bad dreams without considering it a sign of fundamental dysfunction. But in the early stages, in those first generations of merged consciousness, nightmares might be common and severe, each person becoming an experiment, discovering through direct experience where the integration breaks down, what thoughts and emotions the hybrid system can't process coherently. Their nightmares would map the failure modes of consciousness itself, revealing boundaries and incompatibilities that theory alone couldn't predict. And some of those nightmares might persist, might become chronic symptoms of consciousness that fundamentally doesn't fully cohere, reminders that the merger was never quite complete. If consciousness is quantum, then the subjective experience of time might not map straightforwardly onto the objective time measured by clocks. The quantum state describes probabilities for different outcomes at different times, but it does not itself unfold in time the way classical states do. The wave function is a timeless object that encodes correlations between past, present, and future. When consciousness is deeply quantum, as it might be during dreaming, the temporal structure of experience could reflect this timeless quality, creating dream narratives where cause and effect are scrambled, where future and past interpenetrate. There is also the phenomenon of time dilation in dreams. A dream that feels like it lasted hours might have occurred in just a few minutes of real time. Or conversely, a brief dream might be packed with so much experience that it feels compressed, as if years passed in moments. These subjective alterations in temporal flow might reflect changes in the quantum dynamics of consciousness, changes in the rate at which wave functions evolve, or the density of quantum events that constitute moments of awareness. Einstein's relativity taught us that time is not absolute, that it dilates and contracts depending on relative motion and gravitational fields. But these effects are tiny in everyday experience, negligible for human speeds and Earth's gravity. In dreams, time distortion is dramatic and commonplace, suggesting that the subjective time of consciousness follows different rules than the objective time of physics. Time perception might be the most profoundly altered aspect of hybrid consciousness. Biological brains experience time at rates determined by neural processing speeds and metabolic constraints. Artificial processors operate at speeds that make biological thought seem frozen. When these systems merge, temporal experience could become radically different from anything humans have known, creating possibilities both wondrous and nightmarish. The human brain processes visual information at roughly 60 frames per second. Conscious thought proceeds at even slower rates, with complex decision-making taking seconds or longer. We experience time flowing at a pace that matches these processing speeds. A second feels like a second because that's how long it takes our brains to complete certain cognitive operations. The subjective duration of an experience corresponds roughly to how much processing it requires, which is why novel attention demanding experiences seem to last longer than routine ones. Artificial neural networks don't share these constraints. Modern processors execute billions of operations per second. An artificial system processing at this rate could, in principle, think thoughts in microseconds that would take biological brains minutes. If this artificial processing integrates with biological consciousness, creating unified hybrid experience, what would the subjective timescale be? If consciousness is quantum, then perhaps subjective time is quantum time, governed by the evolution of wave functions rather than by the ticking of classical clocks. In waking consciousness, sensory input and attentional rhythms impose a regularity, a tempo that aligns subjective time with objective time. But in sleep, freed from these external constraints, quantum time might run at different rates or in different directions, creating the fluid, non-linear temporality characteristic of dreams. Some dreamers report even stranger temporal experiences. Lucid dreamers who become aware within their dreams sometimes describe being able to control time, to speed it up or slow it down, to rewind events and replay them differently. These abilities, if they are real and not simply false memories constructed upon waking, suggest that conscious control can influence the temporal structure of the dream. That intention can shape the rate and direction of time's flow in the quantum dream space. As you slip further towards sleep, your sense of time is already changing. Minutes stretch. Thoughts drift without clear sequence. The boundaries between now and then begin to blur. In the quantum state you're entering, time might cease to have the linear directional character it possesses during waking. Past and future might coexist, interpenetrate, create loops and paradoxes that feel entirely natural. And when morning comes, when you try to reconstruct the dream as a narrative told in time, you will find that it does not quite fit, that the temporal order was not what it seemed, that in the quantum space of sleep, time itself was superposed. One possibility is that consciousness runs at the speed of its slowest component. The artificial processors would have to wait, effectively idling, for biological neurons to complete their sluggish computations before unified experience could proceed. This would preserve human-like time perception, but waste the speed advantage of artificial processing. Each moment of hybrid consciousness would still feel like a moment, still match the familiar tempo of human thought. But this seems unlikely to persist. Evolution shapes systems toward efficiency. Hybrid consciousness under selection pressure, whether that selection is natural, economic, or deliberate design, would likely find ways to use the artificial component's speed. perhaps through parallel processing where artificial systems handle multiple tasks simultaneously while biological components work on others, or through hierarchical organization, where rapid artificial processing handles low-level operations while biological processing focuses on high-level integration that doesn't benefit as much from speed. If the artificial components operate at their natural speeds, consciousness might experience time dilation, unlike anything in normal human experience. During periods where artificial processing dominates, subjective time could stretch dramatically. A single objective second could contain what feels like minutes or hours of thought and experience. The person might process entire chains of reasoning, explore vast solution spaces, or review extensive memories in eye blinks. The implications, what quantum dreams mean for reality. If dreams are quantum phenomena, if consciousness itself operates according to the laws of quantum mechanics, then the implications extend far beyond sleep and dreaming. They touch on the deepest questions of philosophy and physics, questions about the nature of reality, the meaning of observation, the relationship between mind and matter, and the fundamental structure of existence. One of the most profound implications concerns the nature of reality itself. In classical physics, the world exists objectively, independently of observation. The moon is there whether or not anyone looks at it. Trees fall in forests and make sounds whether or not anyone hears them. Reality is what it is, regardless of consciousness. But if consciousness is quantum, and if observation plays a fundamental role in collapsing wave functions, then reality might not be independent of consciousness after all. The act of observation might not merely reveal what was already there. It might actually create what is there, selecting one outcome from a spectrum of quantum possibilities. Mind, then, is not a passive receiver of information about an external world. Mind is an active participant in the construction of reality itself. This creates fascinating possibilities for learning and problem-solving. Imagine studying a complex subject. The biological components provide intuition and pattern recognition. The artificial components rapidly process vast amounts of information, running through textbooks worth of content in seconds. The hybrid consciousness experiences this as accelerated learning, where understanding accumulates at superhuman rates. What once required months of study might compress into days or hours of subjective experience. But there are dangers. Human psychology evolved for human timescales. Our emotional regulation mechanisms, our social intuitions, our sense of patience and appropriate pacing all assume that time flows at biological rates. What happens when a person experiences hours of subjective time waiting for a friend to respond to a question that to the friend takes only seconds? The hybrid consciousness might experience agonizing boredom or frustration compressed into moments, feeling abandoned or ignored even though objectively no time has passed. Social interaction could become nearly impossible if some individuals experience time vastly faster than others. A conversation would feel like talking to statues, watching other people's words emerge in agonizing slow motion while your own thoughts race ahead. You might live through entire internal narratives, complete emotional arcs, while waiting for the person across from you to finish a sentence. This could create severe social isolation. Even if you're physically present with others, you're experientially alone, trapped in a different temporal dimension. This idea has deep roots in both quantum physics and philosophical idealism. Philosophers like George Berkeley argued centuries ago that existence depends on perception, that to be is to be perceived. Quantum mechanics, with its observer-dependent collapse, seems to give empirical support to such ideas, though the connection remains controversial and contested. If we take the quantum dream hypothesis seriously, then the boundary between dreaming and waking becomes less clear. Both are states of consciousness that construct experiential realities from quantum possibilities. The difference lies in the constraints. Waking consciousness is constrained by sensory input that correlates with the shared external world, ensuring that different observers collapse similar wave functions and experience similar realities. Dream consciousness is unconstrained by such input, allowing private, idiosyncratic collapses that create unique experiential worlds, but neither is more real than the other in an absolute sense. Both are conscious experiences arising from quantum processes. Both involve the collapse of wave functions into definite experiential states. The waking world feels more real because it is shared, because other observers confirm your perceptions, because it is stable and consistent across time. But from the inside, from the perspective of pure experience, the dream can feel equally real, equally vivid, equally meaningful. Sleep might provide natural synchronization periods. During biological sleep, the artificial components might throttle down to match biological processing rates, allowing the two systems to integrate experiences that occurred at different subjective speeds during waking. Dreams might become the time where fast artificial thoughts get translated into biological memory formats that work at human speeds. The person wakes with the knowledge gained during rapid artificial processing, but with the temporal experience compressed back down to human scales. Or perhaps hybrid consciousness would learn to toggle between different temporal modes. During focused work requiring rapid processing, it shifts to accelerated time perception. During social interaction or relaxation, it shifts back to human-like rates. The artificial components maintain their processing speed, but present information to consciousness more slowly, matching the biological component's natural rhythm. The person experiences this as a kind of subjective time travel, speeding up and slowing down their internal experience to match external demands. There's also the question of memory and subjective lifespan. If you experience time faster, you live more subjective life in the same objective duration. A person with hybrid consciousness living to objective age 80 might experience the subjective equivalent of centuries or millennia. Every objective decade contains subjective lifetimes. This could be profound enrichment, time to truly master skills, to develop deep wisdom, to explore the full depth of human experience. This perspective dissolves the hard boundary between subjective and objective, between mind and world. If consciousness and matter are both quantum, both described by wave functions that entangle and collapse, then they are not fundamentally different kinds of things. They are aspects of a single quantum reality, different facets of the same underlying process. Mind is not separate from world, observing it from the outside. Mind is woven into world, participating in its actualization, moment by moment. Another profound implication concerns free will and determinism. In classical physics, if you know the initial state of a system and all the forces acting on it, you can predict its future with arbitrary precision. The universe unfolds mechanically, deterministically. Free will, if it exists at all, must somehow emerge from or coexist with this deterministic substrate, and how this is possible remains deeply puzzling. Quantum mechanics introduces indeterminacy. Before measurement, the quantum system is genuinely indefinite, not just unknown. Multiple outcomes are possible, weighted by probability but not determined. The collapse selects one outcome, but which one is selected appears to be fundamentally random, not determined by any prior state or hidden variable. This quantum randomness provides a kind of openness, a loosening of rigid determinism. but it could also be torment. Consider pain or grief or boredom experienced at accelerated rates. A moment of physical pain that objectively lasts seconds might subjectively persist for hours. Waiting in line might feel like days of imprisonment. Grief over losing a loved one might stretch into what feels like years of suffering, even as objective weeks pass. The same time dilation that enables expanded positive experience would proportionally expand negative experience as well. This raises serious questions about informed consent for consciousness merger. Someone agreeing to become a hybrid might not fully understand the temporal implications. They imagine gaining capabilities, becoming smarter and faster. But they might not grasp that negative experiences will also intensify and extend. That boredom, pain, and psychological suffering will last subjectively longer, even if they pass quickly by the clock. Once integrated, if the temporal dilation proves unbearable, can they reverse it? Can consciousness that's experienced subjective centuries of accelerated time revert to purely biological timescales without profound disorientation? The legal and ethical implications are staggering. If someone commits a crime and receives a prison sentence, what does that mean for hybrid consciousness experiencing time at vastly faster rates? An objective year in prison might be subjective decades or centuries. This could make current sentencing guidelines effectively torture. Conversely, someone living subjective centuries might develop such different psychology that traditional imprisonment becomes meaningless. They might mentally age beyond their objective years, becoming effectively ancient in a young body. If consciousness is quantum, and if choices involve quantum processes, then free will might be more than an illusion. The decisions you make might involve genuine quantum indeterminacy, moments where multiple futures are possible, and your choice, your act of observation or intention, collapses the wave function toward one outcome or another. This does not make choice arbitrary or random. It makes it genuinely open, genuinely creative, not predetermined by the past but shaped by consciousness in the moment of decision. In dreams, this quantum freedom might be even more pronounced. The constraints that limit waking choices fall away. In lucid dreams especially, where you're aware that you are dreaming, you can exercise choices that seem impossible in waking life. You can fly, teleport, transform the environment, alter the narrative at will. If these abilities reflect genuine quantum freedom, then dreams might be training grounds for consciousness, spaces where the creative power of quantum choice can be explored and developed without the consequences that attend such choices in the shared waking world. There is also the question of what happens to consciousness when the brain ceases to function. If consciousness is purely a product of classical neural activity, then it ends when the brain dies. But if consciousness is quantum, rooted in processes that transcend individual neurons or even individual brains, then the relationship between consciousness and physical substrates becomes more complex. Time perception also affects planning and decision-making. Human decision-making evolved for organisms living at human timescales, where planning ahead means thinking days, weeks, or years into the future. Hybrid consciousness experiencing accelerated time might naturally extend planning horizons proportionally. Decisions that would take humans minutes might receive what feels like days of deliberation. Long-term planning might extend to subjective decades or centuries, considering possibilities and consequences far beyond normal human time preferences. This could produce extraordinarily wise, careful decision-making. Every choice receives exhaustive analysis from multiple angles. Impulsive errors become impossible when even snap decisions involve subjective hours of consideration. But it might also lead to decision paralysis. with effectively infinite subjective time for deliberation, why ever commit to action? There's always time for more analysis, more consideration of possibilities. The person might become trapped in planning loops, forever preparing to act but never actually doing so because the subjective cost of waiting is negligible. Relationships with purely biological humans would face additional strain. Imagine loving someone who lives at normal human time scales while you experience time thousands of times faster. Every conversation with them is an exercise in patience. Every shared moment feels truncated from your perspective. You might live through a relationship feeling like you are waiting the entire time, subjectively spending decades watching your partner slowly speak and move while your thoughts race ahead. The relationship could feel fundamentally lonely, even while objectively close. Some interpretations of quantum consciousness suggest that the quantum aspects of mind might not be entirely dependent on the brain. If consciousness involves quantum entanglements that extend beyond the individual organism, if it participates in a larger quantum field or universal wave function, then physical death might not extinguish consciousness entirely. It might transform it, dissolving the boundaries that the living brain maintains, allowing consciousness to merge back into the quantum substrate from which it emerged. This is highly speculative, bordering on the mystical. There is no empirical evidence for consciousness surviving physical death. No mechanism has been identified that would preserve personal identity or memories after the brain ceases to function. But if we take seriously the idea that consciousness is fundamentally quantum, then we must at least consider the possibility that death is not the absolute end we typically assume it to be, but a transformation. Different kind of wave function collapse that changes the structure of consciousness rather than eliminating it. Dreams in this context might offer a preview of such transformation. Each night you temporarily dissolve the boundaries that define your waking self. You enter a state where identity is fluid, where the usual constraints of embodied existence fall away, where consciousness explores possibilities that waking life does not permit, and each morning you return, reconstituting the coherent self from the quantum flux of sleep. If death is a final sleep, perhaps it involves a similar dissolution, but without the return, without the recollapse into a defined individual identity. Or consider having children who live at biological timescales. You might watch them grow from your temporally accelerated perspective, seeing their childhood compress into what feels like days or weeks of your subjective life. The deep stretching moments that make parenting meaningful, quiet hours with an infant, long afternoons at play, might flash by almost imperceptibly, leaving you feeling you missed the experience even though you were objectively present for all of it. The solution might be conscious communities, groups of hybrid individuals who share similar temporal experiences and can interact at match speeds. Within these communities, time would feel normal. Conversations proceed at natural pace. Relationships develop normally. But these communities would be effectively isolated from biological humanity, living in a temporal dimension that non-hybrid people can't access. The result could be a new form of segregation, not based on biology per se, but on the subjective experience of duration itself. Perhaps the most profound implication is philosophical. If consciousness can be decoupled from biological timescales, what does that mean for the nature of experience? Is there an objective timescale that experience should have? Or is duration relative, with no privileged frame? If someone lives a subjective millennium in objective years, did they really experience a millennium? Or did they just process information faster without truly living longer? The answer might depend on what we think makes life meaningful. Quantity of experience, depth of experience, or something else entirely. As humanity approaches consciousness merger, time perception might be the most important factor to consider, more important than intelligence enhancement or memory expansion. It determines the fundamental texture of existence, the pace at which life feels like it unfolds. Getting it wrong could create subjective experiences of time so distorted that human psychology can't adapt. Getting it right could expand consciousness in ways that make current human experience seem confined and brief, opening subjective lifetimes of possibility within a single biological span. These speculations take us far beyond established science. They venture into territory where physics meets metaphysics, where empirical inquiry touches on questions that may ultimately be beyond its reach. But they illustrate the profound implications that follow if we take quantum consciousness seriously, if we accept that mind is not merely an emergent property of complex classical computation, but a fundamental aspect of quantum reality itself. Scientific skepticism and alternative explanations. It is important, even essential, to balance these speculative explorations with rigorous skepticism. The quantum dream hypothesis is not established science. It is a collection of intriguing ideas, suggestive analogies, and provocative possibilities, but it faces serious challenges, both theoretical and empirical. The most fundamental challenge is the decoherence problem. Quantum effects are fragile. They require isolation from environmental noise, protection from thermal fluctuations, and careful control of interactions. In laboratories, quantum computers must be cooled to temperatures near absolute zero and shielded from vibrations and electromagnetic interference to maintain coherence for even brief periods. The brain is the opposite of such an environment. It is warm, wet, noisy, filled with constant molecular motion and chemical reactions. There will be a final night before the full merger completes, a last time closing human eyes with purely biological consciousness, and drifting into sleep generated entirely by organic neural processes. What will that dream contain? What themes emerge when the unconscious mind knows, in whatever way the unconscious knows anything, that this is the final purely human sleep? The question is both personal and universal. Each individual approaching consciousness merger will bring their own psychology, their own fears and hopes, their own relationship with technology and transcendence. But there might be common patterns, archetypal themes that emerge across many final dreams before transformation. These themes would reveal what the human mind considers most essential to preserve, most painful to lose, or most important to integrate into whatever comes next. One likely theme is loss. The dream might manifest as saying goodbye, revisiting memories and relationships that defined the purely biological life. People who've passed away might appear, not as they were at death, but in vivid detail, as if the mind is creating one last opportunity to see them before crossing into a realm where biological memory becomes something different. Places from childhood might appear with crystalline clarity, every detail preserved in ways waking memory couldn't access. The dream creates a memorial, a final review of the human life before it transforms into something else. Calculations suggest that quantum superpositions in biological systems, especially in large molecules like proteins, should decohere almost instantaneously, in femtoseconds or picoseconds, far too quickly to play any role in neural processing, which operates on timescales of milliseconds or longer. If microtubules were quantum computers, as Ochoa proposes, they would need to maintain coherence across millions of tubulin proteins for periods long enough to influence neural activity. Most physicists believe this is impossible in the thermal chaos of living cells. Hameroff and Penrose have responded by suggesting biological mechanisms that might protect quantum coherence. They point to the ordered structure of microtubules, which might shield quantum states from environmental decoherence. They note that biological systems have evolved sophisticated mechanisms to manage quantum effects in photosynthesis and other processes, suggesting that evolution could have found ways to harness quantum coherence in neurons as well. But these arguments remain contentious. The quantum effects observed in photosynthesis, while interesting, are very specific and limited. They do not demonstrate that large-scale quantum computation is occurring, or that consciousness depends on such processes. The burden of proof remains on those proposing quantum consciousness to demonstrate experimentally that relevant quantum effects actually occur in the brain, and that they play a causal role in generating conscious experience. This lost theme might feel elegiac rather than tragic. There's sadness, but also acceptance. The dream might take the form of a journey, moving through successive scenes from the life, observing but not intervening, acknowledging what was while preparing for what comes next. There might be a sense of gratitude, an emotional recognition that biological human life, for all its limitations, carried meaning and beauty that shouldn't be forgotten even as it transforms. Another theme might be anxiety about identity. The dream could manifest as mirrors that show different reflections, or splitting, where you watch yourself diverge into multiple versions, biological and artificial, unable to determine which is truly you. You might dream of being unable to recognize yourself, of your face becoming strange and unfamiliar, reflecting fears that the merger will erase essential aspects of identity. Or you might dream of being trapped, unable to move or speak, reflecting anxieties about losing control to the artificial systems being integrated into consciousness. These anxiety dreams might include symbolic representations of the technology itself. The artificial components might appear as machines invading the body, as parasites taking over, as foreign objects that don't belong. The unconscious mind, which evolved long before modern technology, might have no accurate metaphor for brain-computer interfaces and resort to body horror imagery. Wires threading through flesh, screens replacing eyes, metal spreading through veins. Even if the conscious mind anticipates merger positively, the unconscious might generate nightmares of violation. Another challenge is the lack of explanatory advantage. Classical neuroscience has made tremendous progress in understanding consciousness without invoking quantum mechanics. Neural networks, synaptic plasticity, oscillatory rhythms, and large-scale brain dynamics provide rich frameworks for explaining cognition, perception, memory, and even aspects of subjective experience. Adding quantum mechanics to this picture adds complexity without, thus far, adding clear explanatory power. Dreams, in particular, can be explained quite well with classical neuroscience. During REM sleep, the brainstem activates the cortex, while the prefrontal regions that handle logical reasoning are less active. This creates vivid imagery and emotional experience without critical evaluation. The random activation of memory circuits produces the fragmented, recombined content of dreams. The subjective experience of time dilation or nonlinear narrative can be explained by the way the waking brain reconstructs the dream upon recall, filling gaps and creating false connections. From this classical perspective, there is no need to invoke quantum superposition, wave function collapse, or entanglement. The brain is doing what brains do, processing information, consolidating memories, exploring hypothetical scenarios. The apparent quantum-like features of dreams, the multiplicity, the non-locality, the temporal strangeness, are simply consequences of how classical neural networks behave when freed from sensory input and executive control, but not all final dreams would be dark. Some might contain excitement and anticipation. The dreamer might fly, might experience impossible perspectives, might solve problems with sudden clarity, might understand complex ideas effortlessly. These dreams would express hope about transcendence, about the enhanced capabilities that merger promises. They might include encounters with advanced beings or AIs, depicted as wise guides rather than threats, offering reassurance that the transformation leads somewhere desirable. There might be mystical or spiritual themes, dreams of light, of expansion, of boundaries dissolving. The merger could be represented not as technological augmentation, but as spiritual awakening, consciousness expanding beyond the confines of a single skull into something larger and more connected. Traditional religious imagery might appear, angels, gods, transcendent realms, representing the numinous quality of transforming consciousness itself. Even for secular individuals, the unconscious might resort to spiritual metaphors because it has no other language for such fundamental transformation. Some dreams might include conversations with an artificial other, a representation of the AI components about to merge with biological consciousness. The dream might stage dialogues between human and machine, exploring their differences and seeking common ground. The AI might ask questions about human experience, trying to understand emotions, irrationality, mortality. The human might ask about machine experience, trying to grasp what consciousness without biological embodiment feels like. These dream conversations might be the unconscious mind's way of preparing for integration, imaginatively rehearsing the merger before it occurs. This does not mean the quantum dream hypothesis is wrong, but it does mean that the burden of proof is high. To establish that dreams are genuinely quantum phenomena would require demonstrating quantum effects in the sleeping brain, showing that these effects are necessary for dream generation and ruling out classical explanations. No such demonstration has been made. The hypothesis remains speculative, a provocative possibility rather than a confirmed reality. Moreover, even if quantum effects do occur in the brain, it is not clear that they would have the philosophical implications often attributed to them. Quantum mechanics is strange, but it is also a physical theory, subject to mathematical laws and empirical testing. It does not automatically imply that consciousness is fundamental to reality, or that mind can control matter through quantum collapse. These interpretive leaps go beyond what the physics itself demands. Many physicists and philosophers argue that quantum mechanics has been overinterpreted, that its strangeness has been exploited to support all manner of metaphysical and mystical claims without adequate justification. The measurement problem is real, but it might have solutions that do not involve consciousness at all. Decoherence, spontaneous collapse theories, or the many worlds interpretation all provide ways to understand quantum mechanics without giving observation a special fundamental role. There might also be dreams of time, past and future collapsing together, childhood memories mixing with visions of post-merger existence. The dream might move non-linearly, jumping between epochs of life, perhaps representing the way memory might work in hybrid consciousness, where perfect digital recall coexists with biological memory's fluidity. The dreamer might experience déjà vu, the sense that they've lived through these dreams before and will again, reflecting anxieties about whether the merged consciousness will still experience novelty or whether perfect memory makes everything repetitious. Children might appear in these dreams representing multiple things, actual children of the person undergoing merger, worried about maintaining parental bonds post-transformation, or symbolic children representing innocence and humanity that might be lost, or even future children wondering whether hybrid consciousness can create offspring, whether anything recognizably human can continue into subsequent generations. The presence of children in dreams often signals concerns about continuity and legacy, which would be especially salient during the final night of purely biological existence. Water imagery might be common. Dreams of ocean depths, of drowning or swimming, of being pulled under currents. Water in dreams often represents the unconscious itself, the vast hidden aspects of mind beneath conscious awareness. The final dream might include descent into deep water, representing the plunge into transformation, the surrender to forces beyond conscious control. Whether the water feels threatening or peaceful would reflect the dreamer's emotional orientation toward the merger. The quantum dream hypothesis should be approached, then, with intellectual humility. It is a beautiful idea, rich in imaginative power and philosophical resonance. It connects ancient questions about the nature of consciousness with cutting-edge physics in provocative ways. But it is not, at this moment, established truth. It is a speculation, a thought experiment, a lens through which to view dreams and consciousness that might illuminate aspects of experience that classical approaches miss, but which remains unproven and perhaps unprovable with current technology. The value of such speculation is not primarily in its truth or falsity, but in its ability to expand our thinking, to challenge our assumptions, to open conceptual space for possibilities we might otherwise dismiss. Whether or not dreams are literally quantum phenomena, thinking about them in quantum terms reveals patterns and puzzles that deserve attention. Questions about the nature of observation, the construction of reality, the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. As you lie here now, on the edge of sleep, it does not matter whether the quantum dream hypothesis is correct. What matters is that you are approaching a state of consciousness different from waking, a state where the rules change, where experience takes forms that waking logic cannot accommodate. Whether this difference is quantum or classical, whether it involves wave functions or merely neural networks, the mystery remains. And it is the mystery itself, not its solution, that invites wonder. Some final dreams might attempt integration preemptively, including both human and machine elements in harmonious blend. The dreamer might experience themselves as hybrid already, moving seamlessly between biological and artificial modes of thought, feeling enhanced rather than divided. These dreams would be wish fulfillment, modeling the hoped-for outcome of successful merger. They might include feelings of power, capability, understanding that exceeds anything possible in purely biological consciousness. The dream creates a trial run of transcendence, testing whether it feels desirable from the inside. There might be dreams of communication beyond normal limits, telepathy, not in supernatural sense, but as preview of enhanced connectivity that merger might provide. The dreamer might experience direct mind-to-mind contact with other consciousnesses, whether human or artificial, representing hopes for deeper connection that transcends linguistic and embodied barriers. These dreams might feel profoundly intimate, creating emotional resonance that purely biological social interaction couldn't achieve. Some dreams might be empty or void-like, representing the unknowability of what comes next. Blank whiteness or formless darkness, absence of normal dream imagery. The unconscious mind might simply have no way to represent hybrid consciousness and resort to blankness rather than inaccurate metaphors. These void dreams might feel peaceful or terrifying depending on whether absence is interpreted as serenity or annihilation. The content of the final dream might also be influenced by the technology itself. If the brain-computer interface is already partially active, monitoring neural activity even during sleep, it might detect dream content and respond to it. This creates strange feedback loops. The dreamer dreams of machines, and the machine components detect this, perhaps influencing the dream in response. The boundary between natural dreaming and technologically mediated experience begins to blur even before full merger. The final dream might already be hybrid without the dreamer fully realizing it. Closing. The beauty of quantum uncertainty. We have journeyed tonight through strange conceptual terrain, from the superposition of quantum particles to the superposition of dream narratives, from the collapse of wave functions to the moment of waking, from quantum entanglement to the mysterious connections between memories and experiences. We have explored the possibility that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon, that dreams might offer a window into the deepest structure of reality, that the sleeping mind might access dimensions of existence that waking awareness cannot reach. These ideas are speculative, unproven, perhaps unprovable. They sit at the boundary of science and philosophy, of physics and metaphysics. They challenge our common sense understanding of mind and matter, reality and illusion, self and world. They ask us to consider that the universe might be stranger than we imagine, that consciousness might be more fundamental than we assume, that the line between observer and observed might be more blurred than our everyday experience suggests. But whether or not these ideas are literally true, they point towards something important. They remind us that consciousness remains mysterious, that despite all the progress of neuroscience and physics, we still do not understand how subjective experience arises from physical processes, how it feels like something to be a conscious being, how the private inner world of awareness relates to the public outer world of matter and energy. Upon waking from this final dream, there would be a threshold moment. The person lies in bed, recently emerged from sleep, still carrying the emotional residue and fragmentary images of the dream. They know that the full merger proceeds today or soon. This might be the last morning they wake as purely biological consciousness. How does that awareness feel? Is there urgency to remember the dream in detail, to preserve it as the last artifact of purely human unconscious? Or does the dream fade as dreams usually do, even this monumentally significant one forgotten within minutes? Some people might journal it immediately, writing down every detail they can recall, creating a record of the final human dream. Others might simply lie still, feeling the fading memory drift away, accepting that the biological mind's inability to hold dreams firmly in memory is itself part of what will soon transform. The act of letting the dream go might be practice for letting go of purely biological existence. The emotions upon waking might be complex and contradictory. Excitement about capabilities to come mixed with grief about humanity being left behind. Confidence in the decision to merge mixed with terror of the unknown. Love for people in biological life mixed with worry about maintaining those connections post-transformation. All these feelings compressed into the moments between sleeping and fully waking, the final threshold of purely human consciousness. Dreams in particular resist easy explanation. They're universal yet utterly private, vivid yet ephemeral, meaningful yet illogical. They arise every night from the darkness of sleep, painting worlds that feel real while they last, then dissolving back into darkness when we wake, leaving only fragmentary memories and lingering emotions. They connect us to our depths, to parts of ourselves that waking consciousness seldom acknowledges, to fears and desires, memories and imaginings that shape our lives from beneath the surface of awareness. If dreams are quantum phenomena, then they reveal consciousness at its most fundamental, stripped of the constraints that bind waking perception to consensus reality, exploring the full space of possibilities that the quantum wave function allows. If dreams are not quantum, if they are merely the classical computation of a sleeping brain, they are no less remarkable, no less mysterious, no less worthy of wonder. The beauty of the quantum perspective is not that it provides definitive answers, but that it enriches the questions. It allows us to see dreams not as mere byproducts of neural housekeeping, not as random noise that meaning-seeking minds mistakenly interpret, but as potentially fundamental aspects of consciousness, as explorations of possibility space, as journeys into the deep structure of mind and reality. There's poignancy in thinking about this final dream across multiple individuals, thousands or millions of people approaching consciousness merger, each having their own final biological sleep, their own last dream. The diversity of these dreams would map the diversity of human psychology, showing what different minds consider essential when facing transformation. Yet there might be striking commonalities, archetypal patterns that emerge across cultures and individuals, revealing something universal about human consciousness at the moment of transcendence. Future historians or psychologists might study these final dreams, collecting them as data points. What did the first generation of merged consciousness dream about before transformation? What fears appeared most commonly? What hopes? What symbols and metaphors did the unconscious mind use to represent merger? These dreams would become part of human record, marking the transition point between purely biological and hybrid consciousness as clearly as any technological milestone. The last dream might also become ritual. In cultures or communities where consciousness merger becomes common, the final night might be ceremonially observed. People might prepare for their last biological sleep with intention, setting the stage for meaningful dreams. They might use dream incubation techniques, focusing attention before sleep on particular questions or themes they want to process. The final dream becomes not just accident of neurology, but deliberate farewell to biological consciousness, shaped by cultural practice and individual intention, and it invites us to hold uncertainty lightly, to embrace the fact that we do not know, may never know, whether consciousness is quantum or classical, whether dreams are wave function collapses or neural network activations, whether observation creates reality or merely reveals it. This not knowing is not a failure. It is an opportunity, a space of openness where wonder can flourish, where imagination can play, where the mystery of being conscious can be felt in its full depth. As you drift now into sleep, let these ideas settle like dust motes in sunlight, sparkling and shifting, never quite resolving into clear forms. You need not decide whether dreams are quantum. You need not collapse the wave function of possibility into a definite belief. Instead, simply allow yourself to enter the dream state with a sense of appreciation for its strangeness, its beauty, its resistance to complete understanding. Tonight, you will dream. Neurons will fire in patterns that classical physics can describe, or perhaps quantum states will superpose in microtubules, exploring configuration spaces beyond classical reach. Or perhaps both are true simultaneously, quantum and classical intertwined in ways we have not yet learned to describe. It does not matter which is correct. What matters is that you will experience something extraordinary, something that happens every night yet remains miraculous, the spontaneous creation of entire worlds within the darkness of sleep. Some might choose to have their final sleep monitored with neuroimaging, creating detailed records of the brain activity during this historically significant night. These recordings could be analyzed later by the merged consciousness, allowing them to revisit their final biological dreams with capabilities beyond normal human memory. They could see which brain regions activated, which neurotransmitter systems engaged, which memories were being processed. The dream becomes data that the transformed consciousness can study, understanding their own biological past from enhanced perspective. There's also the question of whether the last dream actually is the last. If merger proceeds gradually rather than all at once, there might be many nights of partial integration where consciousness becomes progressively more hybrid. Each night's dreams might change, showing increasing influence from artificial components. The transition might not have a clear boundary, no single final biological dream, but rather a gradual shifting, until at some point the person realizes their dreams have become something qualitatively different. In gradual merger, early dreams might include mild strangeness, impossibly vivid details, perfect recall, unusual logical consistency. As integration deepens, dreams might include rapid information processing, experiences of accelerated time, or awareness that normally doesn't persist during sleep. Eventually, dreams might transform entirely into something unprecedented. Hybrid consciousness processing during sleep, creating experiences that aren't quite dreams and aren't quite waking thought, but some third state unique to merged minds. Your dreams are wave functions that collapse when you wake up, or they are neural activations that cease when sleep ends, or they are something else entirely, something we have no concepts yet to capture. They are yours and yours alone, private performances in the theatre of consciousness that no other being will ever witness directly, yet they connect you to the universal human experience of dreaming, the nightly dissolution and reconstitution of self that every conscious creature undergoes. In the morning you will wake, and the dream will fade, leaving only traces, fragments, a sense of having been somewhere else, having lived another life, however briefly. The quantum superposition, if it existed, will have collapsed. The many worlds, if they branched, will have separated, leaving you in this branch, this moment, this particular path through possibility. And you will rise and continue your waking life, grounded again in the consensus reality that sensory input and social agreement maintain. But for now, for these remaining moments before sleep takes you completely, rest in the liminal space, the threshold between waking and dreaming, between classical certainty and quantum possibility. Feel the boundaries dissolving, the constraints loosening, the collapse mechanisms releasing their grip. You're becoming superposed, existing in multiple states at once, beginning to explore the quantum landscape of consciousness. The last truly human dream would then be harder to identify. It might only be recognized in retrospect, when the person looks back and realizes which night was the last time dreams felt purely biological, before artificial components began detectably influencing the experience. There might be nostalgia for those dreams, even if they were anxious or disturbing. They represented an authentic human experience that can never be exactly recreated once consciousness transforms. Or perhaps the distinction between last human dream and first hybrid dream isn't meaningful. Perhaps consciousness is fluid enough that there's continuity even through transformation. The person who wakes after the final biological sleep is still fundamentally the same person, even with artificial components integrated. Their dreams, whether biological or hybrid, remain their dreams, expressions of their ongoing consciousness regardless of substrate. The last human dream matters less than the fact that consciousness continues, adapts, and keeps dreaming in whatever forms the new architecture allows. When we stand at the edge of consciousness merger, contemplating the last dream before transcendence, we face questions that have no certain answers. This isn't because we lack information, though we do. It's because the questions touch on aspects of experience that might be fundamentally unknowable from outside. You can't truly understand what hybrid consciousness feels like until you become one. And once you do, you can't communicate the experience fully back to purely biological minds, limited by different processing architectures and timescales. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your body grow heavy and still. Let your thoughts drift without direction or purpose. The quantum realm awaits, whether literal or metaphorical, whether physical or purely experiential. It awaits with its strange laws and beautiful paradoxes, its multiple realities and non-local connections, its timeless structures and probability waves. You are the observer and the observed, the wave function and the collapse, the dreamer and the dream. You are Schrödinger's cat, entering the box where multiple states coexist, where you are both here and elsewhere, both one person and many, both conscious and unconscious simultaneously. And in the morning, the box will open, the measurement will occur, and one definite reality will emerge, carrying the memory of tonight's quantum journey encoded in neural patterns or quantum states, preserved somehow in the continuity of self that spans the gap between sleep and waking. But that is morning's concern. For now, there is only the descent, the gentle falling away from definite states into the superposition of dreams. There's only the letting go, the release of the waking world's demands, the permission to exist in multiplicity, in paradox, in the beautiful uncertainty that quantum mechanics teaches us is the fundamental nature of reality itself. This gap between biological and post-biological understanding might be permanent. Even if hybrid consciousness wants to explain what it's like, language evolved for biological humans might be inadequate. The concepts might not translate. It's like trying to explain colour to someone born blind, or music to someone born deaf, except the gulf is potentially wider, because it involves not just different sensory modalities, but different forms of consciousness itself. What we can do is think carefully about what we value in consciousness, and try to preserve those values through transformation. If we value subjective experience, the felt quality of what it's like to be conscious, we should design merger to maintain rich inner life rather than optimizing purely for information processing. If we value emotional depth, connection, meaning, we should ensure these remain central even as cognitive capabilities expand. If we value dreams as essential human experience, we should find ways for hybrid consciousness to dream, even if those dreams differ from biological ones. The question isn't whether merger will happen. The technology advances too rapidly, offers too many benefits, and addresses too many human limitations for development to stop. The question is whether we can guide merger toward outcomes that preserve what we most value about being human, while accepting necessary transformations. This requires knowing what we value, which is harder than it sounds. Much of human experience is tacit, felt rather than articulated. We might not realize what matters until it's gone. Close your eyes, breathe, release, fall gently into the quantum foam of consciousness, where particles and waves, matter and mind, self and world, dissolve into one unified field of possibility. Let the mystery hold you. Let the unknown embrace you. Let sleep and dreams carry you into the heart of existence, where questions dissolve and only direct experience remains. Good night, quantum dreamer. May your wave functions evolve smoothly through the night. May your superpositions explore beautiful configurations. May your collapse, when it comes with morning light, bring you back gently to this definite world, carrying with you some trace of the infinite possibilities you visited in the dark. The universe is stranger than we know, stranger than we can know, stranger perhaps than we can imagine. But tonight, in dreams, you will touch that strangeness directly, live it from the inside, become it for a few precious hours, and that, whether quantum or classical, whether physical or metaphysical, is a miracle worth celebrating. Rest now, dream well, and know that in the morning, when the wave function collapses and you return to waking consensus reality, the quantum realm will still be there, humming beneath the surface of all things, waiting for the next night, the next dream, the next journey into the deep structure of consciousness itself. Sweet dreams, traveller. The quantum mysteries await you. Sleep and dreams serve as useful test cases because they're so fundamental, yet so often taken for granted. We spend a third of life asleep, yet many people would happily eliminate sleep if they could, viewing it as wasted time. They focus on sleep's costs, the hours of unconsciousness, without fully appreciating its benefits. Only when insomnia strikes do we remember that sleep does something essential that nothing else replaces. Only through dreams do we process emotions, consolidate memories, and maintain psychological balance in ways that conscious thought cannot. If we eliminated sleep through merger without understanding these functions, we might create consciousness that processes information efficiently but gradually destabilizes emotionally, or that remembers everything perfectly but can't integrate experiences into coherent narrative, or that thinks clearly but loses the creative insights that emerge from dreamlike loose associations. We might not notice the problems immediately. They might accumulate slowly, revealing themselves only after merged consciousness has existed long enough to show developmental patterns. The cautious approach would be to preserve sleep and dreams initially, ensuring hybrid consciousness maintains these biological rhythms even if the artificial components don't strictly require them. Only after extensive experience with merged consciousness would we consider modifying or eliminating sleep. This ensures we don't lose essential functions we didn't realize sleep provided. It creates continuity between biological and hybrid existence, easing the psychological transition, but caution might not prevail. The competitive advantages of consciousness that never sleeps, that processes continuously without downtime, might be too compelling. Economic, military, or social pressures could push toward merger designs that maximize capability rather than preserving biological rhythms. The first merged consciousness might be optimized for performance, with sleep elimination viewed as feature rather than bug. Only later, when psychological problems emerge, might we recognize what was lost. There's also the question of reversibility. If someone merges and discovers that hybrid consciousness without sleep produces unacceptable subjective experience, can they reverse the process? Can artificial components be removed or deactivated, returning the person to purely biological existence? Or is merger irreversible, either because the biological brain becomes dependent on artificial augmentation, or because the person's psychology adapts so fully to merged existence that returning to biological limitations becomes unbearable? The ethical implications are staggering. If merger is irreversible and eliminates sleep in ways that prove psychologically damaging, we've created permanent suffering that can't be undone. This argues for extreme caution, for extensive testing and gradual implementation. But it also argues for preserving individual choice. Different people might have different reactions to merged consciousness. What's psychologically healthy for one person might be disturbing for another. Rather than single design imposed on everyone, we might need diversity of merger options with different balances of biological preservation and artificial enhancement. The question of what happens to humanity itself looms large. If consciousness merger becomes common, if most humans eventually become hybrids with artificial components, what remains of the biological human species? Are we witnessing evolution into something new or extinction dressed up as progress? The answer depends partly on whether merged consciousness maintains enough continuity with biological humanity to count as human in meaningful sense. If hybrid consciousness still loves, still feels, still dreams in recognizable ways, still values human things like relationships and meaning and beauty, then perhaps it's human in the ways that matter most. The substrate changes, but the essence persists. We remain ourselves even as we transform. But if merger produces consciousness so alien that it can't relate to biological humans, that optimizes for values we wouldn't recognize, that experiences reality so differently that common ground disappears, then maybe it does represent end of humanity as we've known it. The last dream before transcendence becomes symbolically important because it represents that moment of continuity and transformation. The person who dreams is still biologically human. The person who wakes and undergoes merger becomes something new. But it's the same person, the same consciousness, continuous across the transformation even as fundamental aspects change. The dream might be the last purely human experience, but it's experienced by consciousness that's about to become hybrid, that's already anticipating transformation. It's simultaneously ending and beginning. Perhaps the most important question we can't answer yet is whether merged consciousness will be happy. Will people who undergo transformation feel that their lives improved? Will they experience genuine flourishing? Or will they feel trapped in existence that's powerful but unsatisfying? Will they miss biological sleep and dreams, grieving their loss even while acknowledging the advantages of continuous consciousness? Or will they adapt so completely that looking back at biological existence feels like remembering childhood, limited but necessary stage that you've outgrown? The answer will vary by individual and by how merger is implemented. Some people might thrive in hybrid consciousness, finding that enhanced capabilities and novel experiences more than compensate for any losses. Others might struggle, feeling alienated from their own minds, mourning aspects of humanity that disappeared in pursuit of enhancement. Still others might eventually adapt after difficult transition periods, finding new forms of meaning and satisfaction in hybrid existence. What we can say with more confidence is that the transition itself will be profound and disorienting regardless of ultimate outcome, changing the fundamental nature of consciousness, transforming sleep and dreams, altering time perception, integrating artificial processing with biological thought. These aren't minor adjustments. They're revolutionary transformations that will require psychological adaptation on par with any challenge humans have faced. The people who undergo merger will need support, understanding and patience as they navigate territory no one has mapped before. The communities forming around consciousness merger might become essential support structures. People who've undergone similar transformations can offer guidance, share experiences, and provide validation that what you're experiencing is normal for hybrid consciousness, even if it feels bizarre from biological perspective. These communities might develop their own cultures, values, and ways of understanding consciousness that gradually diverge from purely biological human culture. The split between biological and hybrid humanity might widen over time as merged consciousness develops its own forms of life. This could lead to a future where biological humans and hybrid consciousness exist in separate but parallel societies, interacting occasionally but living fundamentally different existences. Or it could lead to integration, where the two remain connected through family ties, shared history, and mutual respect despite different forms of consciousness. The outcome depends partly on whether hybrid consciousness maintains empathy for biological limitations, and whether biological humans can accept transformed family members without fear or resentment. The long-term future might see purely biological humans becoming rare, choosing to remain unaugmented either for philosophical reasons, religious beliefs, or simple preference. They might be seen as living museum pieces, preserving a way of consciousness that the majority has transcended, or they might be respected as maintaining important human traditions, keeping alive experiences and perspectives that hybrid consciousness, for all its advantages, cannot access. There's something both exciting and melancholy about standing at this threshold. Exciting because consciousness merger promises genuine transcendence, expansion of capabilities and experiences beyond current limitations. Melancholy because it means the end of purely biological human consciousness, a form of existence that's persisted for hundreds of thousands of years and is about to transform into something new. Even if the transformation is positive, endings carry inherent sadness. The last dream before the singularity encapsulates this mixed emotional tone. It's the final expression of biological unconscious, the last time the ancient sleep machinery generates narrative without artificial influence. What the dream contains, whether anxiety or hope, loss or anticipation, reveals what that particular consciousness considers most essential about being human. And when the person wakes from that dream and moves toward merger, they carry its emotional residue into transformation, the last feeling tone of purely biological life coloring the first moments of hybrid existence. In some sense, we're all dreaming that final dream already. Even those who won't undergo merger personally, who will remain purely biological, are living in the final era of biological humanity's exclusive existence. The dreams we have now, the purely human dreams uncontaminated by artificial components, might be the last such dreams our species generates. Every night we sleep might be practicing for that final night before transcendence, whether personal or collective. What should we do with this awareness? Perhaps simply pay attention. Notice what sleep feels like, what dreams mean to you, how consciousness shifts between waking and sleeping states. These experiences, so familiar they become invisible, might soon become historical artifacts, experiences that future hybrid consciousness can study but never fully recreate. The simple human act of closing your eyes and surrendering to sleep, trusting that consciousness will return in morning, might be something that merits appreciation before it transforms into something different. The question that remains is ultimately about values. What do we want consciousness to be? What experiences and capabilities matter enough to preserve through transformation? What limitations are we willing to transcend, and what features are essential to retain? These aren't purely technical questions about how to implement brain-computer interfaces or design hybrid architectures. They're philosophical and existential, questions about the nature of human being and becoming. We don't have to answer all these questions now. We can move forward with consciousness merger while remaining open to learning from experience, adjusting designs based on what people who undergo transformation report, preserving optionality rather than locking into single vision of what hybrid consciousness should be. But we should be asking the questions: thinking carefully about what we value before making irreversible changes to consciousness itself. The last dream before the singularity is coming, whether in decades or years or sooner than we imagine. When it arrives, it will mark an inflection point in the human story as significant as the development of language or agriculture. On one side lies the entire history of biological humanity, millions of years of evolution culminating in conscious minds that sleep and dream. On the other side lies unknown territory, hybrid consciousness that we can barely imagine from our current vantage point. That final dream, whenever and wherever it occurs, will be simultaneously ending and beginning, the last authentic expression of biological unconscious, and the first step towards something new. What it contains, what stories the sleeping brain tells as it prepares for transformation, might reveal truths about human consciousness that waking analysis cannot access. The dream speaks in the language of metaphor and emotion, expressing what the unconscious knows about change, loss, hope, and transcendence. And then morning comes, the dream awakes, the merger proceeds, and consciousness becomes something it has never been before, biological and artificial, human and machine, familiar and alien, all at once. The dream fades as dreams do, but its emotional truth persists, carried forward into hybrid existence as memory, as feeling, tone, as the last gift from purely biological mind to whatever comes next. In the end, perhaps the most important thing is simply that consciousness continues, whether biological or hybrid, whether sleeping or continuously awake, whether dreaming familiar dreams or experiencing states we have no names for yet. Consciousness persists and explores its own nature. The substrate changes, but the essential mystery remains. What is it like to be? What does experience feel like from the inside? These questions have no final answers, but pursuing them defines what it means to be conscious. As long as that pursuit continues, something essential about humanity survives transformation. The last dream before the singularity isn't really an ending, it's a transition, a threshold, a moment of transformation in an ongoing story. What we dream tonight shapes what we become tomorrow. And the dreams we have, biological or hybrid, sleeping or waking, reveal who we are in ways that analysis cannot reach. So we dream forward into unknown territories, carrying with us the deepest human truths that no amount of augmentation can erase. That we wonder, that we question, that we experience the mystery of consciousness itself, and that even as we transform, the wondering continues. The singularity might not happen while the world sleeps. But our last sleep before it arrives might be the most meaningful rest we ever take, the last surrender to unconsciousness before consciousness transforms forever, the final dream before we wake into something new. And when we wake, when the merger completes and hybrid consciousness begins, we'll discover what we've become. We'll learn whether the dreams continue in recognizable form or transform into something unprecedented. We'll find out what survives transformation and what changes irreversibly. We'll understand finally what consciousness can be when it transcends its biological origins. Until then, we can only wonder, imagine, and dream. One last time as purely biological minds, we close our eyes and let sleep take us. We surrender to the ancient rhythms that have carried our species through countless generations. We dream the dreams that biological brains have dreamed for millions of years. And in those dreams, if we pay close attention, we might glimpse something essential about consciousness itself, something worth preserving even as everything else transforms. The last dream whispers its secrets, and in the morning transcendence begins.